The most dangerous man in Seoul just made the worst bet of his life. Kang Jae-min controlled everything: politicians, casinos, an empire built on fear and blood money. At 32, the notorious crime boss had never lost a wager, never felt weakness, never questioned his own cruelty. Then his associate dared him to make one woman fall in love with him in 3 months. The target? Amara Bennett, a plus-size black community educator who wouldn't even accept his flowers, let alone his lies. What started as a 5 billion won game became the one thing money couldn't buy: redemption. If you want to see how far this story travels, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. Now let's begin. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jae-min's penthouse like bullets against glass. 40 stories above Gangnam, the city spread beneath him in neon veins. Every light a business he owned, every shadow a debt someone owed. He stood motionless in the darkness, whiskey glass balanced between 2 fingers, watching storm clouds devour the skyline. Behind him, laughter echoed off marble floors. The gathering had started 3 hours ago. Crime syndicate heirs, corrupt prosecutors, CEOs with blood under their manicured nails. They sprawled across leather furniture worth more than most Seoul apartments, cocaine residue glittering on the glass coffee table like toxic snow. Jae-min didn't touch the drugs. Never had. Control was his addiction, the kind you couldn't snort or swallow, the kind that required a stone-cold mind and a heart that had stopped bleeding years ago. "You're boring us, Hyungnim," Seo Min-jae's voice cut through the noise. The younger man sauntered over, designer suit wrinkled, eyes bright with expensive liquor and malice. Min-jae had been Jae-min's associate since university, back when they were just rich kids playing at Rebellion before the real violence started. Standing there like some tragic hero. "You've made enough money this quarter to buy half of Busan. Celebrate a little." Jae-min didn't turn around. "I don't celebrate Tuesdays. It's Thursday." "Same difference," Min-jae laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. He leaned against the window beside Jae-min, breath fogging the glass. Outside, Seoul twisted and pulsed like a living organism, brutal, beautiful, indifferent. "You know what your problem is? You've conquered everything. Politicians kiss your ring. Rivals piss themselves when you walk into a room. There's nothing left that scares you." He paused, grin widening. "Or excites you." Jae-min finally looked at him. "Get to the point." Min-jae pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket and slid it across the window ledge. The woman in the picture didn't belong in Jae-min's world. She sat on a bench in some unremarkable park, surrounded by teenagers in school uniforms. Her smile was unguarded, genuine in a way that felt almost alien to him. Plus-sized, elegant, with dark brown skin that caught the afternoon sunlight like warm honey. She wore simple clothes, no designer labels, no desperate attempt to perform beauty for male approval. Her natural hair framed her face in tight coils, and her eyes, even through a telephoto lens, held something Jae-min hadn't seen in years. Peace. "Who is she?" His voice came out colder than intended. Min-jae's grin turned predatory. "Amara Bennett, 28, American-born, moved to Seoul 4 years ago. Works at some youth center in Mapo, teaching kids English and life skills, or whatever bleeding heart nonsense passes for a career these days." He tapped the photo. "Makes maybe 3 million won a month. Lives in a shoebox apartment. Volunteers at soup kitchens on weekends. The kind of woman who thinks goodness actually matters." Someone across the room called out, drunk and crude. "Min-jae, did you bring us a whore?" "Better." Min-jae raised his voice so the whole penthouse could hear. "I brought our esteemed Jae-min Hyungnim a challenge." The room went quiet. Nothing silenced rich predators faster than the promise of entertainment involving their apex leader. Jae-min set his whiskey glass down on the marble ledge with a soft click. "I don't need challenges. I need quarterly reports and clean money transfers." "You need a pulse," Min-jae shot back. "Look at you. 32 years old. You've got more money than 3 generations could spend. You've got power that makes politicians weep. And you're standing here like a corpse in an expensive suit, bored out of your fucking mind." He shoved the photograph closer. "This woman? She's everything you're not. Warm, honest, believes people are fundamentally good. She wouldn't touch someone like you with a 10-meter pole." Jaemin picked up the photo, studied it. Amara's smile didn't waver under his gaze. She had no idea she was being watched, catalogued, reduced to a conversation piece for monsters in tailored clothing. So? Jaemin's tone stayed flat. Min-jae leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for their audience. So I'm saying you can't make her fall in love with you. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Around them, the room erupted. Laughter, jeers. Someone started taking bets immediately, pulling out their phone to create a group chat for wagers. These men had bet on everything. Election results, murder trials, how long it would take a rival's wife to crack under interrogation. A woman's heart was just another commodity. Jaemin stared at the photograph, at Amara's unguarded expression, at the teenager beside her laughing at something she'd said. He should have walked away, should have thrown the photo back in Min-jae's face and returned to the business of running an empire. Should have recognized the trap. But boredom was a slow death, and Kang Jaemin hadn't felt alive in years.
6 months, Min-jae announced to the room, emboldened by Jaemin's silence. I bet 5 billion won that our great and terrible Hyung-nim cannot seduce this ordinary woman into marriage within 6 months. No force, no threats. She has to fall for you willingly and say yes to a proposal. His eyes glittered with malicious joy. She has to believe you actually love her.
The crowd roared approval. Phones came out. Money started moving through encrypted accounts before Jaemin had even responded. He looked at Min-jae. Really looked at him. Saw the younger man's desperation for relevance, his need to prove he could still provoke the untouchable Kang Jaemin into showing emotion. Jaemin smiled. It was the expression that made prosecutors resign and rivals flee the country. 3 months, he said quietly. The penthouse went silent. Min-jae blinked. What? 3 months, Jaemin pocketed the photograph. I'll have her in love with me and wearing my ring in 3 months, not 6. Someone whispered a prayer in the corner. Even among criminals, some wagers felt like tempting fate. Min-jae's shock dissolved into savage glee. You arrogant bastard! Done! 3 months, 5 billion won. Legal marriage or you lose. He stuck out his hand. Jaemin shook it. The deal was sealed. Around them, the party reignited with fresh viciousness. More drugs, more liquor, more laughter at the expense of a woman who had no idea her life was about to be invaded by the most dangerous man in South Korea. Jaemin returned to the window. Outside, Seoul glittered like broken promises. He pulled out the photograph one more time. Amara's smile seemed to mock him from the glossy paper, so genuine it almost hurt to look at. This would be easy. It was always easy. People were predictable. Desires were universal. Everyone wanted something: money, power, security, validation. He just had to identify her weakness and exploit it with surgical precision. 3 months was generous. He'd have her in 2. Chiko. The surveillance started immediately. Jaemin didn't do anything himself. He had people for that. By Friday morning, a full dossier sat on his desk. 40 pages, photographs, financial records, social media archives, daily routines mapped down to the minute. Amara Bennett woke at 6:15 every morning, jogged along the Han River for 40 minutes, showered, made breakfast, usually Korean style, having adapted well to local cuisine, left for the Mapo Community Youth Center by 8:30, taught English and mentorship classes until 6, volunteered at Seoul Station Soup Kitchen every Tuesday and Thursday evening, returned home by 9, read before bed, lights out by 11, no boyfriend, no dating apps, no scandalous past. She paid her bills on time, donated 10% of her salary to charity, and had a spotless credit record. Her apartment was small, but clean. Her social circle consisted of other educators and nonprofit workers, good people who believed in systemic change and grassroots organizing. She was by every measurable standard exactly what Min-jae had described: ordinary, kind, and completely unimpressed by the things that made powerful men hard. Jae-min read the dossier 3 times. Anything useful? His head of security, a former NIS agent named Park Dong-hyun, stood at military attention beside the desk. She's clean. Nobody's clean. She is. Dong-hyun's expression stayed neutral.
No criminal record. No debts beyond student loans she's paying down aggressively. No family drama. Parents still married, living in California. One younger brother in graduate school. She video calls them every Sunday. He paused. She's genuinely good, sir. Jaemin looked up sharply. Nobody is genuinely good. Then she's the exception. The word settled into Jaemin's chest like a stone. He dismissed Dong-hyun and sat alone in his office. Not the glass penthouse, but the real headquarters beneath the luxury hotel in Gangnam. Reinforced walls. Soundproofing. This was where actual business happened, where rivals came to beg and left in body bags. He studied Amara's photograph again. Her smile didn't change. It never would. She was frozen in that moment of unguarded joy, surrounded by kids who probably loved her, teaching lessons about empathy and growth and other fairy tales that died the moment reality showed its teeth. His phone buzzed. Min-jae's name flashed across the screen. Clocks ticking, Hyungnim. 89 days left. Jaemin deleted the message. He didn't need reminders. Time was just another resource to manage. He opened his laptop and began drafting plans with the same precision he used for hostile takeovers. Identify the target's values. Establish common ground. Create manufactured coincidences. Apply pressure through scarcity and emotional manipulation. Escalate intimacy through calculated vulnerability. It was a formula. And formulas always worked. By midnight, he had a complete strategy. By 1 a.m., he was pouring gasoline on it and starting over. Because Amara's file revealed something inconvenient. She'd walked away from a 6-figure job in California to work for poverty wages in Seoul. She'd rejected multiple marriage proposals from wealthy men, Korean and foreign. She'd been offered luxury apartments by a grateful chaebol family, whose son she'd mentored, and she'd politely declined. She didn't want what he could offer, which meant the usual playbook was useless. Jaemin leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere above him, Seoul thrummed with the violence and commerce that built his empire. Below him, the hotel's underground garage held enough luxury vehicles to fund a small nation's infrastructure. And none of it mattered. For the first time in a decade, Kang Jaemin didn't have an obvious move. He looked at Amar's photograph one last time before closing the file. "Let's see what you're really made of," he murmured. "Bit." The rain came again on Monday morning. Jaemin sat in the back of his armored sedan, watching the Mapo Community Youth Center through tinted windows. The building was old, probably decades past its intended lifespan. Cracked concrete, faded paint, a hand-drawn banner announcing an upcoming talent show. Amara emerged at 6:30, right on schedule. She wore a simple raincoat and carried a canvas bag overflowing with books. No umbrella. Her natural hair was pulled back in a loose bun, already dampening in the drizzle. "Sir?" His driver, a former gangster named Choi, glanced in the rearview mirror. Jaemin didn't answer. He watched Amara lock the center's door, test the handle twice, cautious, responsible, then start walking toward the subway station. "Follow her." The sedan rolled forward silently. Amara walked quickly, despite the rain, head down, navigating puddles with practiced ease. She stopped once to help an elderly woman carry groceries up a steep incline, laughing at something the grandmother said. The interaction took 3 minutes. She refused offered money, just smiled, bowed respectfully, and continued walking. Jaemin's jaw tightened. Theatrical. Had to be. Nobody helps strangers without wanting something in return. But his surveillance team's reports over the past week documented 17 similar incidents. Amara helped people compulsively, carrying strollers up subway stairs, giving her seat to pregnant women, buying coffee for exhausted construction workers during her morning jog. Either she was the world's most committed actress, or she actually gave a damn about strangers. "Pull up beside her," Jaemin ordered. Choi's eyes widened. "Sir, the plan was change of plans." The sedan accelerated smoothly, gliding through traffic until it rolled parallel to Amara's path. Jaemin's 2 bodyguards, both former special forces, immediately stepped out, umbrellas materializing in their hands. Jaemin emerged into the rain. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford coat that cost more than Amara's annual salary, handmade Italian shoes, a watch that could have funded the youth center for a year. Everything about him screamed money and danger.
the kind of man you cross the street to avoid. Amara looked up, noticed the commotion, and immediately frowned. Not fear. Annoyance. "You're going to get soaked," Jamin said, his voice smooth, practiced. "Let me offer you a ride." She glanced at the sedan, at the bodyguards, at him. Then she kept walking. "I'm fine, thank you." The rejection was so casual it almost didn't register. Jamin stood frozen for 3 seconds, longer than he'd hesitated during actual firefights, before his brain caught up. She dismissed him like he was a stranger hawking phone cases. One of his bodyguards moved to intercept her path. "Miss, our employer is being generous." "Your employer can be generous by letting me walk to the subway in peace." Amara's tone stayed polite but firm. She adjusted her bag's strap, books shifting. "I don't accept rides from strangers, especially strangers who roll up in cars that cost more than my students' families make in 5 years." The bodyguard looked back at Jamin, clearly unsure how to proceed. Nobody refused Kang Jamin, ever. Jamin waved him off and stepped closer to Amara himself. "I apologize if we came across as aggressive. That wasn't the intention." He tried on a softer expression, the one that usually made women melt. "I just noticed you walking in the rain without an umbrella. Common courtesy." Amara studied him, really looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown, sharp with intelligence, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Suspicion? Pity? Common courtesy would be asking if I needed help before sending armed men to block my path. She gestured at his bodyguards. "This is intimidation dressed up as chivalry." Her smile was polite and devastating. "But I appreciate the thought. Have a good evening." She stepped around him and continued toward the subway. Jamin stood in the rain, water soaking into his expensive coat, watching her disappear into the crowd. Behind him, Choi and the bodyguards waited in absolute silence. "Sir," one of them finally ventured, "should we—" "Get back in the car." They obeyed instantly. Jamin slid into the back seat, water dripping onto leather upholstery. He stared at his reflection in the tinted window. A man who controlled billions in assets, who'd orchestrated political coups and corporate destruction, who made prosecutors and gangsters alike lose sleep. And he'd just been politely annihilated by a woman carrying a bag of donated books. His phone buzzed. Min-jae, naturally. "How'd first contact go, Hyung-nim? She swoon yet?" Jamin deleted the message without responding. Through the window, Seoul's neon signs bled color into the rain-slicked streets. Somewhere in that mass of humanity, Amara Bennett was boarding a subway train, probably not thinking about him at all. For the first time in years, Kang Jae-min felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Not fear, not anger. Curiosity. "Choi," he said quietly, "clear my schedule tomorrow evening." "Sir, I'm going to need a different approach." The flowers arrived at the youth center on Wednesday. 3 dozen white roses in a crystal vase worth more than the center's monthly electric bill. The card was simple: "For making the world less dark." A grateful stranger. Jae-min's surveillance team reported back within hours. Amara had read the card, looked genuinely confused, then donated the entire arrangement to the hospital across the street. The nurses wheeled the flowers into the children's cancer ward, and Amara spent her lunch break visiting the kids, never mentioning who'd sent the gift. Thursday brought designer chocolates. She left them in the center's break room for the staff. Friday brought a bracelet, subtle, elegant, probably 15 million won. She returned it to the courier with a polite note. "I think you have the wrong address." Saturday brought nothing. Jae-min sat in his office reviewing security footage from the week, watching Amara systematically dismantle every traditional move in his playbook. Min-jae stopped by around midnight, drunk and gleeful. "I heard about the flowers, and the chocolates, and the jewelry." He collapsed into the chair across from Jae-min's desk, grinning like a demon. "She's not even keeping the stuff. You're burning money for nothing." "She's being strategic," Jae-min said calmly. "Playing hard to get." "Playing hard to get requires acknowledging you exist." Min-jae leaned forward. "She doesn't even know your name, does she?" Jae-min didn't respond. Min-jae's laughter echoed off the walls. 79 days left, Hyung-nim. Maybe you should try showing up in person." "Oh wait, you did." She walked away. He stood, still laughing. This is going to be the most expensive lesson in humility you've ever bought. After he left, Jaemin sat alone in the darkness. The surveillance footage played on a loop. Amara laughing with students. Amara serving soup to homeless men at Seoul Station. Amara reading on her tiny apartment balcony, bare feet tucked under her, completely content in her unremarkable life. She didn't need him. That was the problem. Every person Jaemin had ever encountered needed something: money, protection, status, revenge. Need created leverage. Leverage created control. But Amara had built a life that required nothing he could provide. His phone buzzed. A new report from his surveillance team. Amara would be volunteering at Seoul Station's soup kitchen Thursday evening, same as every week. Jaemin stared at the message. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He made a decision without a plan. Thursday evening, Jaemin walked into Seoul Station's underground soup kitchen alone. No bodyguards, no driver, no expensive coat, just a plain black jacket, jeans, and hands that had signed execution orders but had never ladled soup for a stranger. The kitchen was chaos. Volunteers shouting orders, industrial pots boiling over, the smell of kimchi jjigae and stale desperation thick in the air. Homeless men and women lined up with plastic trays, eyes hollow, shoulders bent under invisible weight. Amara stood at the serving counter, hair tied back, wearing a stained apron over her clothes. She smiled at every person who passed, genuine warmth, no performative pity, and made small talk while scooping rice. Jaemin watched from the doorway. An older woman in a volunteer coordinator vest approached him. "You here to help or eat?" "Help." She looked skeptical. He didn't exactly scream, "volunteer," but handed him an apron anyway. "Dishwashing station's in the back. We're short-staffed." Jaemin tied the apron and made his way through the kitchen. He'd killed men, orchestrated corporate espionage, bribed half the city's political infrastructure. He'd never washed a dish in his life. The industrial sink was a metal monstrosity filled with scalding water and grease. Plastic trays piled up faster than he could clean them. His hands, soft from a lifetime of delegating physical labor, burned within minutes. He didn't stop. An hour passed. Then 2. His back ached. His shoulders screamed. Sweat soaked through his shirt. And then he heard her voice. "Hey, are you new?" Jaemin turned. Amara stood 3 feet away, holding a stack of dirty bowls. She looked tired, good tired, the kind that came from meaningful work, and her expression was open, curious. She didn't recognize him. The realization was a knife between his ribs. He'd spent hundreds of millions on gifts, surveillance, and strategy, and standing in a soup kitchen wearing a stained apron, he was completely invisible to her. "Yeah," he managed. "First time." "Well, welcome." She handed him the bowls. "I'm Amara." "Jaemin." She smiled, that same unguarded smile from the photograph, and something in his chest cracked. "You're doing great, Jaemin. Most first-timers quit after 20 minutes. The dishwashing station's brutal." She grabbed a towel and wiped her hands. "Where'd you hear about us?" He scrambled for a lie that wouldn't sound suspicious. "I was walking by. Thought I should do something useful." Amara's smile widened. "That's exactly how I started, 4 years ago. Just walked in one day and never left." She glanced back at the serving line. "Anyway, thanks for helping. We really need it tonight." She turned to leave. "Wait," Jaemin said. She looked back. His mind went blank. Kang Jaemin, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals and talked prosecutors out of indictments, couldn't form a coherent sentence. Is this something you do often?" The words came out clumsy, too eager. Amara tilted her head, studying him. "Every Tuesday and Thursday. We feed about 200 people a night." Her expression softened. "If you're interested in volunteering regularly, we can always use help. No pressure, though. Tonight's enough if that's all you can do." "I'd like to come back." The word surprised him as much as her. Amara's smile turned into something brighter. "Great, I'll see you next Tuesday then." She disappeared back into the chaos of the serving line. Jaemin stood at the sink, hands submerged in scalding water, and realized with absolute clarity that his plan had just detonated. He wasn't supposed to care if she remembered him. He wasn't supposed to feel relief at the thought of seeing her again. He wasn't supposed to want her approval more than her submission. But standing in that soup kitchen, surrounded by the city's forgotten and discarded, watching Amara serve food like every person mattered equally, Kang Jae-min felt something he'd buried 15 years ago. Shame. Not at his wealth or his crimes or his empire built on violence. Shame at the man he'd become. Shame that someone like Amara could look at him and see nothing worth remembering. He finished washing dishes in silence. When the kitchen finally closed at midnight, Amara found him wiping down the counters. "You're thorough," she said approvingly. "Most volunteers bolt the second we finish serving." Jaemin shrugged. "Seemed wrong to leave a mess." "I like that." Amara grabbed her jacket from a hook. "Listen, a few of us usually grab late-night street food after we finish. Nothing fancy, just tteokbokki and soju. You're welcome to join." Every instinct screamed yes. This was access. This was infiltration. This was exactly what he needed. But watching her smile, so genuinely kind, so free of manipulation, Jaemin felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Guilt. "Maybe next time," he said quietly. "I have an early morning." Disappointment flickered across her face. "Sure, next time." She left with the other volunteers, laughing about something as they pushed through the station's exit. Jaemin stood alone in the empty kitchen. His phone buzzed. Donghyun's message. "Cars waiting at the north entrance, sir." Jaemin looked at the text, then at the kitchen he'd just spent 3 hours cleaning, then at the doorway where Amara had disappeared. He pocketed his phone and walked out into Seoul's night alone. No car, no bodyguards, no empire. Just a man who was starting to realize that winning might mean losing everything that made him who he was. And somewhere in the distance, Min Jae's countdown clock kept ticking. 74 days left. 74 days to make Amara fall in love with a lie. Or 74 days to discover if Kang Jae-min was capable of becoming someone worth loving at all. The second Tuesday, Jae-min arrived at the soup kitchen 20 minutes early. He wore the same plain black jacket and jeans, hands scrubbed clean of the previous week's dishwater burns. His driver had dropped him 6 blocks away, far enough that no one would connect the volunteer to the armored sedan idling in a luxury hotel parking garage. The kitchen coordinator, her name was Mrs. Kang, he'd learned, looked genuinely pleased to see him. "You came back." "Most don't." "I said I would." She handed him the same stained apron. "Dishwashing again." "You were good at it." Jaemin tied the apron and moved toward the industrial sink, scanning the room for Amara. She wasn't there yet. His pulse kicked up, irrational, annoying, and he forced himself to focus on the mountain of trays already piling up. The water scalded his hands. He didn't care. Amara arrived 15 minutes later, breathless and apologetic, her canvas bag sliding off one shoulder. Sorry, the subway was a nightmare." She noticed Jaemin at the sink and her whole face brightened. "Jaemin, you're here!" The way she said his name, like it mattered, like she'd actually remembered, did something dangerous to his chest. "I said I'd come back," he repeated. "People say a lot of things." She tied her apron with practiced efficiency. Following through is rarer. She moved toward the serving line, then paused. "Hey, after we close tonight, that street food invitation's still open. If you're free." Jaemin's throat tightened. This was the opening, the access point, exactly what he needed. "I'm free," he said. Amara's smile could have powered the entire district. "Great. Don't let Mrs. Kang work you to death before then." She disappeared into the controlled chaos of prep work, and Jae-min returned to the dishes with something uncomfortably close to anticipation burning under his ribs. The next 3 hours blurred together, scalding water, grease, the rhythmic clatter of plastic trays. Jae-min worked mechanically, his mind already planning the evening. What to say, how to position himself, which vulnerabilities to manufacture to build rapport. But when midnight came and the kitchen finally emptied, all his strategies evaporated. Because Amara led him and 3 other volunteers, 2 college students and an older man who introduced himself as a retired teacher, to a tiny pojangmacha tucked between a convenience store and a shuttered phone repair shop. The plastic tent was held up by duct tape and hope. Inside, mismatched stools surrounded a portable gas burner where the Ajuma owner cooked tteokbokki that smelled like childhood nostalgia Jae-min had never actually experienced. "This place doesn't look like much," Amar said, sliding onto a stool and gesturing for Jae-min to sit beside her. "But it's perfect after a long shift. The Ajuma's been here for 30 years. She knows everyone. The Ajuma emerged from behind her burner, wiping her hands on a faded apron. She looked at Amara with grandmother-level affection. Amara, ya! You brought new friends. This is Jae-min, Amara said. First-timer at the kitchen. He survived dishwashing duty twice, so I figured he's earned some proper food. The Ajuma studied Jae-min with the kind of scrutiny that made crime bosses uncomfortable. Then she grunted approval. You look too skinny. I'll make extra. She disappeared back to her burner, and the college students immediately launched into complaints about midterm exams. The retired teacher offered unsolicited study advice. Amara laughed and mediated, effortlessly weaving the conversation together. Hae-min sat in silence, watching her. She belonged here, in this cramped tent with mismatched stools and cheap soju, surrounded by ordinary people living ordinary lives, struggling with rent and exams and aging parents, but laughing anyway because laughter was free, and sometimes that was enough. Jae-min had never belonged anywhere. His childhood had been cold marble floors and parents who communicated through lawyers. University had been a performance, studying business while learning the real lessons from Min Jae's criminal family connections. His empire was built on fear and respect, never trust, never love. He'd convinced himself that belonging was a weakness. But watching Amara pour soju for the retired teacher while teasing one of the college students about his dramatic love life, Hae-min felt the first crack in that conviction. You're quiet, Amara said suddenly, turning to him. The others had gotten distracted by the Ajuma bringing out steaming plates of tteokbokki. Everything okay? Hae-min forced a smile. Just tired. It's been a long week. What do you do? She asked. For work, I mean, when you're not washing dishes. The lie came automatically. Import, export, shipping logistics. It was technically true. His criminal empire moved everything from luxury cars to untraceable weapons through Seoul's ports. Nothing exciting. Sounds stressful. It is. Amara studied him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. You don't seem like the corporate type. His pulse spiked. What type do I seem like? Batumchi. I don't know yet. She accepted a bowl of tteokbokki from the Ajuma and slid it in front of him. You're hard to read, like you're performing even when you're standing still. She paused, chopsticks hovering. But you showed up to wash dishes twice. That says something real. Jae-min's mouth went dry. He'd been profiled by intelligence agencies and rival crime syndicates. None of them had cut this close to the truth in 30 seconds. Maybe I just needed something different, he said carefully. From the shipping logistics grind? From everything. The honesty slipped out before he could stop it. Amara's expression softened. I get that. She took a bite of tteokbokki, chewed thoughtfully. That's actually why I moved to Seoul. I had a good job in California, comfortable salary, benefits, the whole American dream package, but I woke up every day feeling empty, like I was just existing, not living. So you came here? So I came here. She smiled at the memory. No job. Barely spoke Korean. Just this stubborn belief that if I could help people, really help them, not just push papers for a nonprofit that spent more on galas than programs, maybe I'd feel like my life mattered. She looked at him directly. Does that sound naive? No, Jae-min said quietly. It sounds brave. Amara laughed, self-deprecating, genuine. Brave is a generous word. My parents thought I'd lost my mind. My brother staged an intervention. She poured herself a shot of soju. But I've never regretted it. Even on the hard days when I'm eating ramyun for the 4th night in a row because I'm broke, I don't regret it. The college students called Amara over to settle some debate about K-pop groups. She excused herself with an apologetic smile, leaving Jae-min alone with his tteokbokki and the uncomfortable realization that he was enjoying himself. Not because the plan was working, because the plan didn't matter. For 3 hours, sitting in a plastic tent that smelled like fish cakes and nostalgia, Kang Jae-min forgot he was supposed to be manipulating anyone. He just existed, laughed at bad jokes, ate cheap food, listened to strangers complain about ordinary problems, and it felt more real than anything he'd experienced in 15 years. The weeks blurred together. Tuesday and Thursday nights became sacred. Jae-min arrived at the soup kitchen early, stayed late, and never missed the street food gatherings afterward. He learned the names of the regular volunteers, college students cycling through, retirees looking for purpose, office workers seeking meaning outside fluorescent-lit cubicles. Amara folded him into the group effortlessly. She had a gift for making people feel seen, asking follow-up questions about things mentioned weeks ago, remembering birthdays, noticing when someone seemed off and gently pulling them aside. Jaemin studied her like a text he couldn't quite translate. During the day, he still ran his empire, still attended meetings where men discussed human trafficking routes over expensive scotch, still signed off on bribes and blackmail, still walked into rooms where people trembled. But twice a week, he became someone else, someone who laughed at the Ajuma's terrible jokes, someone who helped carry supplies from the storage room without being asked, someone Amara smiled at like he was a friend, not a weapon. The duality was fracturing him. "You're slipping," Min-jae said one night, drunk and accusatory in Jaemin's office. "It's been 6 weeks. 6 weeks and you haven't even taken her on a real date. You're just playing dishwasher like some pathetic charity case." Jaemin didn't look up from the contracts he was reviewing. "Relationships take time." "Bullshit! You're stalling!" Min-jae slammed his hand on the desk. "You know what I think? I think you're scared. I think this ordinary woman with her ordinary life is breaking the great Kang Jaemin, and you don't know how to deal with it." Jaemin's jaw tightened. "Get out." 45 days left, Hyungnim. Min-jae's voice turned mocking. "Better accelerate that seduction timeline, or are you planning to propose over dish soap?" After Min-jae left, Jaemin sat in the darkness and admitted the truth he'd been avoiding. Min-jae was right. Not about being scared, fear was irrelevant, but about stalling. Because every Tuesday and Thursday, Jaemin walked into that soup kitchen and felt the weight of his real life lift. For a few hours, he wasn't Kang Jaemin, crime lord and corporate predator. He was just Jaemin, the quiet volunteer who washed dishes and made Amara laugh. And the longer he played that role, the harder it became to remember it was supposed to be a performance. His phone buzzed. A message from Dong Hyun. Update on the Busan situation. 3 bodies. Authorities paid off. Clean. Jaemin stared at the screen. 3 men were dead because he'd ordered it. Their families would grieve, their children would grow up fatherless. And he'd approved it the same way someone approved expense reports, efficiently, without emotion. That was who he really was. Not the man who made Amara laugh. The monster who made mothers weep. He deleted the message and poured himself a drink. The shift happened on a Thursday in early autumn. Jaemin arrived at the kitchen to find chaos. Mrs. Kang was on the phone, her face pale. 2 volunteers were crying. Amara stood in the center of the storm, her usual calm shattered. "What happened?" Jaemin asked. One of the college students, Minji, a sweet kid studying social work, looked up with red eyes. "The center got robbed last night. They took our emergency fund, almost 8 million won. We use that for rent and supplies and—" Her voice cracked. "Without it, we might have to close." Jaemin's blood went cold. "Close? The building owner's been looking for an excuse to evict us for months," Amara said, her voice brittle with barely controlled fury. "Some developer wants the lot. Without that emergency fund, we can't make rent. We can't buy food for the kitchen. We're done." Mrs. Kang hung up the phone, looking defeated. "Police say there's nothing they can do. No cameras, no witnesses. The money's gone." The room fell silent except for Minji's quiet sobbing. Jaemin's mind shifted into a different gear. Cold, calculating, efficient. 8 million won was nothing. Pocket change. He could replace it with a single phone call. Could have his people track down whoever robbed the center and make them regret being born. Could buy the entire building and gift it to the center tax-free. But doing any of that would expose who he really was. And exposure meant losing Amara before the game even reached its conclusion. He looked at her. Really looked. She was holding herself together through sheer will, but her hands trembled slightly as she tried to comfort Minji. This wasn't just a job to her. This was her life's purpose, the thing that gave her existence meaning, and it was being stolen. "We'll figure it out," Amara said, her voice hollow. "We always do." But even she didn't sound convinced. Booked. Jaemin left the kitchen an hour later, his mind racing. He sat in his sedan 6 blocks away, Donghyun in the driver's seat, waiting for orders. Find out who robbed the Mapo Community Youth Center, Jaemin said quietly. I want names, addresses, and financial records by morning. Donghyun nodded. And then? And then I want the money returned, anonymously. Make it look like the thieves had a crisis of conscience. Sir, Donghyun hesitated. If we get involved, there will be questions. The center will wonder where the money came from. Then make sure they don't wonder. Make it clean. Donghyun pulled out his phone and started making calls. Jaemin leaned back against the leather seat, heart pounding. This was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake. Every strategic bone in his body screamed that emotional decisions led to exposure, and exposure led to failure. But he couldn't watch Amara's world collapse when he had the power to stop it, even if saving her meant risking everything. By noon the next day, Donghyun had answers. 3 low-level thugs connected to a rival gang operating in Mapo. They'd robbed the center on a tip that it kept cash donations in an unlocked safe. Stupid, desperate, and already bragging about the score in local bars. Where are they now? Jaemin asked. We have them in the warehouse, waiting for your orders. Jaemin arrived at the warehouse 20 minutes later. It was one of his legitimate properties, officially a storage facility for imported electronics, unofficially a place where problems got solved quietly. The 3 men were bound to chairs in the center of the empty floor, duct tape over their mouths, eyes wide with terror. They were young, mid-20s maybe. Probably thought robbing a nonprofit was easy money. They were about to learn otherwise. Jaemin approached slowly, hands in his pockets, expression neutral. One of his enforcers stepped forward. Boss, they've already confirmed the $8 million, spent about $2 million on gambling and girls, the rest is still cash. Get the $6 million, now! The enforcer disappeared and returned minutes later with a black duffel bag. Jaemin opened it, counted quickly. 6 million won in mixed bills. He looked at the 3 terrified men. You stole from a community center that feeds homeless people, Jaemin said quietly. From volunteers who work for free because they actually give a damn about strangers. His voice dropped to something colder than winter. You robbed hope from people who have nothing else. One of them tried to speak around the duct tape. Jaemin ignored him. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return this money. Anonymously. You're going to leave it in a bag outside the center's door tonight with a note apologizing for taking it. He leaned closer. And then you're going to leave Seoul, permanently. Because if I ever hear your names again, if you so much as jaywalk in this city, I will find you, and what happens next will make you beg for prison. He straightened. Do you understand? All 3 nodded frantically. Jaemin gestured to his enforcers. Make sure they follow through. Then escort them to Busan, and make it clear they're not welcome back. He left the warehouse without looking back. The money would be returned. The center would survive. Amara would never know. And Kang Jaemin would remain a volunteer who washed dishes twice a week and made her smile. The perfect crime. The duffel bag appeared outside the center's door Friday morning with a handwritten note. We're sorry. We were desperate. Please forgive us. Mrs. Kang called the police, who dutifully filed a report and expressed amazement at the criminal's sudden conscience. Local news picked up the story, a feel-good piece about karma and human decency. Amara called Jaemin that afternoon. He was in a meeting with a corrupt city councilman when his personal phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, then saw her name and immediately stood. Excuse me. He stepped into the hallway. Amara? Jaemin. Her voice was bright with disbelief and joy. You're not going to believe this. The money came back. All of it. Someone left it outside the center with an apology note. Relief flooded through him. That's incredible. I know. Mrs. Kang is crying. Minji's planning a celebration. We're saved. She laughed, pure unrestrained happiness. I know it sounds naive, but maybe people really can change. Maybe even the worst of us can choose to do the right thing. Jaemin closed his eyes. Maybe? Anyway, I just wanted to share the good news. I know you were worried too. She paused. Hey, are you free tomorrow? Not for the kitchen. I was thinking we could do something normal, like actual friends instead of just volunteer colleagues. His heart stopped. Like what? I don't know. Coffee? A walk along the river? Something that doesn't involve industrial dishwashing. Her voice carried a smile. Unless you're sick of me already. I'm not sick of you.
Then it's a date. Well, not a date, just a friend date. You know what I mean. Jaemin leaned against the wall, phone pressed to his ear, and felt the trap close around him. This was it. The opening. The escalation. Exactly what he'd been strategically working toward. So why did it feel like stepping off a cliff? Tomorrow sounds good, he said quietly. Great. I'll text you details. She hesitated. And Jaemin? Thanks for being there this week. It meant a lot. You mean a lot.
She hung up before he could respond. Jaemin stood in the hallway of his corporate headquarters, built with blood money and political corruption, and stared at his phone. You mean a lot. 3 words that shouldn't have mattered. 3 words that were destroying him. Saturday afternoon, Jaemin met Amara at a cafe in Itaewon. He'd spent 2 hours choosing what to wear, something that looked casual but not careless, approachable but not weak. He settled on dark jeans and a simple sweater, no jewelry, no obvious wealth markers. Amara arrived in a yellow sundress that made her dark skin glow. Her natural hair fell in loose curls around her shoulders. She looked radiant. You clean up nice, she teased, sliding into the seat across from him. You too. They ordered coffee, Americano for him, caramel latte for her, and fell into easy conversation. She talked about the center's upcoming talent show. He talked about shipping logistics headaches that were partially true and mostly fabricated. But beneath the surface pleasantries, Jaemin felt the conversation shifting into something deeper. Can I ask you something? Amar said suddenly. Of course.
Why do you volunteer? Really? She leaned forward slightly. Most people our age are climbing corporate ladders and chasing promotions. You show up twice a week to wash dishes for free. That's not normal. Jaemin chose his words carefully. Maybe I'm tired of normal. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Amara studied him with those sharp, knowing eyes. You're running from something. His throat tightened. What makes you say that?
Because I recognize it. She stirred her latte absently. I ran from my old life too. Comfortable job, comfortable salary, comfortable numbness. I ran because staying meant accepting that work and money were the only things that mattered. She met his gaze. You're running from something similar. I can see it. Jaemin's pulse hammered. And what do you think I'm running from? I don't know yet, Amara admitted. But whatever it is, it's heavy. You carry it in your shoulders, in the way you never fully relax, even when you're laughing. She smiled softly. You don't have to tell me, but I want you to know you're safe with me. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't define you. The words hit like bullets. You're safe with me. It doesn't define you. If she only knew. If she only knew that the man sitting across from her had ordered executions, had ruined lives, had built an empire on fear and violence, had entered her world as part of a cruel wager with his sociopathic associate. If she knew any of it, she'd run, and he wouldn't blame her. Thank you, he managed. Amar reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The contact was brief, friendly, not romantic, but it sent electricity through his entire body. Come on, she said, standing. Let's walk. I want to show you my favorite spot. She led him to Yeouido Hangang Park, where the river stretched wide and glittering under the autumn sun. Families picnicked on the grass. Couples rode tandem bikes. The city's violence and corruption felt distant, almost imaginary. They walked along the riverside path in comfortable silence. This is where I come when things get overwhelming, Amara said eventually. The river doesn't care about rent or funding or politics. It just flows. There's something peaceful about that. Jaemin watched the water move, dark and endless. Do you ever regret it, leaving your old life? Every month when rent's due, she laughed. But no, not really. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I'd rather struggle for something meaningful than succeed at something empty. Does that make sense? More than you know. They stood there, river breeze pulling at their clothes, and Jaemin felt the final wall inside him crack. He was supposed to seduce her, manipulate her emotions, make her fall in love with a carefully constructed lie. But standing beside the Han River, watching Amara smile at the water like it held all the world's secrets, Jaemin realized with absolute horror that the script had flipped. He wasn't making her fall in love with him. He was falling in love with her. And it was the worst possible outcome. Marked. The realization haunted him for days. Jaemin threw himself into work, trying to bury the feeling under spreadsheets and strategic meetings. But Tuesday came, and he was back at the soup kitchen, washing dishes while stealing glances at Amara across the room. Thursday repeated the pattern. They started spending time together outside the volunteer schedule, coffee dates that weren't dates, long walks that felt too intimate to be casual, late-night texts that made his chest ache. Amara opened up about her family, her fears, her dreams of expanding the center's programs. She talked about wanting to adopt someday, about her love for old movies and terrible puns, about the loneliness of living far from home, but the fulfillment of building something meaningful. And Jaemin listened, really listened, not as a predator studying prey, as a man desperate to know everything about the woman who'd somehow become his entire world. He told her carefully edited truths, about growing up wealthy but isolated, about parents who communicated through lawyers and nannies, about building a successful career that felt hollow. He didn't tell her about the violence, the corruption, the empire built on suffering. He didn't tell her about Min Jae's wager. He didn't tell her that every moment they spent together was supposed to be calculated manipulation, because somewhere along the way, it had stopped being manipulation. It had become the only real thing in his life. 8 weeks in, Min Jae cornered him at a syndicate gathering. "You're in love with her," Min Jae said flatly. They stood on a private balcony overlooking Gangnam, the party raging inside. "Don't try to deny it. I can see it. Everyone can see it." Jaemin didn't respond. Min Jae laughed, sharp, cruel. "This is incredible. The great Kang Jae-mun, undone by a woman who makes poverty wages and donates flowers to hospitals." He leaned against the railing. "So what's the plan? You going to tell her the truth? Confess that you approached her because of a bet? That you've been lying about everything since day one? Shut up. Or maybe you'll just keep lying. String her along until you get that ring on her finger, collect your 5 billion won, and then what? Live happily ever after?" Min Jae's eyes glittered with malice. "You think she'll forgive you when she finds out? You think love conquers all?" Jaemin grabbed Min Jae by the collar and slammed him against the railing. "I said shut up." Min Jae didn't flinch. 21 days left, Hyungnim. Clock's ticking. Better make your move soon." He smiled. "Unless you're planning to lose on purpose. Throw away 5 billion won and your reputation because some ordinary woman made you feel feelings." Jaemin released him and stepped back, breathing hard. Min Jae straightened his jacket. "Here's the thing about love, Hyungnim. It makes you weak. It makes you stupid. And in our world, weakness gets you killed." He turned to leave, then paused. "She deserves to know the truth. But you're too much of a coward to tell her." After Min Jae left, Jaemin stood alone on the balcony, hands shaking. 21 days. 3 weeks to either propose and win the bet, or confess everything and lose her forever. There was no third option, no scenario where he got to keep Amara without the foundation of lies eventually crumbling. His phone buzzed. A text from Amara. "Couldn't sleep, thinking about you. Is that weird?" Jaemin stared at the message until his vision blurred. Then he typed back, "Not weird. I'm thinking about you too." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'm glad we met, Jaemin. You've made my life better." He closed his eyes. "You've made mine better too," he wrote. And for the first time in 15 years, Kang Jae-min cried. Not from pain or rage or fear, from the soul-destroying knowledge that he'd finally found something worth keeping, and the only way to keep it was to destroy the man he'd spent his entire adult life becoming. The breaking point came on a rainy October evening. Amara had been working herself to exhaustion, long hours at the center, extra volunteer shifts, planning the upcoming talent show. Jaemin noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way her smile had started to fray at the edges. "You need to rest," he told her after Thursday's soup kitchen shift. "I'm fine," she'd insisted, but her hands trembled slightly as she put away supplies. Friday morning, Mrs. Kang called him. "Amara collapsed," the older woman said, voice shaking. "She's at Seoul Medical Center. They think it's exhaustion and stress. Can you—" Min didn't let her finish. He was already running. He abandoned a crucial meeting with Chinese smuggling partners, walked out mid-negotiation, leaving millions in deals unfinished. His driver broke every traffic law getting to the hospital. Jaemin's heart pounded so violently he thought it might rupture. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and despair. He found Amara's room on the 4th floor. She was asleep, hooked to an IV, monitors beeping softly. Her face looked small against the white pillows. Jaemin sank into the chair beside her bed and took her hand carefully, terrified of waking her. For hours, he sat there. The feared mafia boss who'd never prayed in his life found himself bargaining with a universe he didn't believe in. Let her be okay. I'll give up everything. Just let her be okay. Amara stirred around sunset, eyes fluttering open. Jaemin? Her voice was rough from sleep. I'm here. She smiled weakly. You didn't have to come. I'm fine. You collapsed. Just overdid it. She squeezed his hand. The doctor says I need to rest more, cut back hours. Apparently my body doesn't appreciate my work ethic. Jaemin's throat burned. You scared me. I'm sorry. She studied his face. You look terrible. When's the last time you slept? Doesn't matter. It matters to me. They sat in silence, hands intertwined, monitors beeping steadily. Jaemin, Amar said softly. Can I tell you something? Anything. I'm falling in love with you. The world stopped. Jaemin's heart shattered and rebuilt itself simultaneously, each beat pure agony. I know we said we're just friends, Amar continued, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. But it's more than that, at least for me. You make me feel seen, safe, like I can be completely myself without performing or pretending. She looked at him with devastating honesty. I don't know what your past looks like. I don't know what you're running from, but I know the person you are when you're with me, and that person is someone I want in my life, permanently. Jaemin couldn't breathe. This was it. The moment he'd been strategically working toward, the goal, the end game. She just handed him everything he needed to win the bet, and it felt like being gutted alive. Amara? His voice cracked. You don't have to say it back, she said quickly. I just needed you to know. Life's too short to keep feelings hidden. I learned that today. She closed her eyes, still holding his hand, and drifted back to sleep. Jaemin sat frozen, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath. I'm falling in love with you, the words he'd been manipulating her toward, the words that were now destroying him from the inside out. He stayed until visiting hours ended, then stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, hands shaking violently. His phone buzzed. Min-jae, naturally. Heard your girl's in the hospital. Perfect opportunity, Hyung-nim. Nothing bonds people like crisis. Propose while she's vulnerable. Lock it down. Jaemin stared at the message. Then he heard footsteps. Min-jae appeared at the end of the hallway, smiling like a demon. He held a manila folder. What are you doing here? Jaemin's voice was lethal. Thought I'd check on Amara. Make sure she's okay. Min-jae's smile widened. And maybe clear up some confusion. Ice flooded Jaemin's veins. Don't! Don't what? Min-jae walked closer. Don't tell her the truth? Don't show her the signed wager agreement? Don't explain that her wonderful boyfriend approached her as part of a 5 billion won bet to see if he could manipulate her into marriage? Min-jae, if you go in that room, you'll what? Min-jae's eyes glittered. Kill me? In a hospital? You're slipping, Hyung-nim. He held up the folder. She deserves to know, before you propose, before she says yes to a lie. This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me. I made the bet, and I'm not letting you weasel out of it by pretending you developed a conscience. He pushed past Jaemin toward Amar's room. Jaemin grabbed his arm. Please. The word came out broken. Min-jae stopped, looked back, saw something in Jaemin's expression that made him pause. You really do love her, Min-jae said quietly. Not mocking, almost awed. You stupid bastard. You actually fell in love with her. Please don't do this, Jaemin whispered. Min-jae stared at him for a long moment. Then he yanked his arm free and walked into Amara's room. Jaemin stood paralyzed in the hallway, heart hammering, world collapsing. Inside the room, he heard Min-jae's voice, calm, polite, devastating. Amara, I'm Seo Min-jae, a friend of Jae-min's. I'm sorry to bother you while you're recovering, but there's something you need to see. Jae-min forced his legs to move, stumbled to the doorway. Amara was sitting up, confused, as Min-jae placed the folder on her lap. "What is this?" she asked. "The truth," Min-jae said, "about why Jae-min really approached you." Amara opened the folder. Jae-min watched her face as she read the wager agreement, watched the confusion shift to disbelief, watched disbelief harden into devastation. She looked up, found Jae-min standing in the doorway. "Is this real?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Jae-min opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 5 billion won, Amara read from the document. Marriage within 3 months. Seduction strategy. She looked at Min-jae. "This is some kind of joke." "It's not a joke," Min-jae said gently. "I'm sorry. I thought you should know before things went any further." Amara's hands started shaking. The folder fell to the floor, papers scattering. She looked at Jae-min. "Tell me he's lying." Jae-min's throat closed completely. "Tell me this is fake," Amar's voice rose. "Tell me you didn't approach me because of a bet. Tell me the last 2 months weren't some elaborate game." "Amara," the word came out choked. "Tell me!" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, monitors beeping frantically. Jae-min took a step forward. "It started as a bet, but it's not. Get out. Please listen. Get out!" Her voice cracked. "You studied me. You learned my routines. You infiltrated my life like I was some kind of target." She pressed her hands to her face. "You made me fall in love with you as part of a game." "It's not a game anymore," Jae-min said desperately. "I love you. Everything I said, everything I felt, it's real now." "Now?" Amara laughed bitterly through her tears. "When did it become real, Jae-min? After the first lie? The 10th? How many times did you manipulate me before you started developing actual feelings?" He had no answer. Amara looked at him with an expression that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Not anger. Betrayal so deep it had murdered something essential in her eyes. "You know what the worst part is?" she whispered. "I told you that you were safe with me, that whatever you were running from didn't define you." She wiped her face roughly. "But I was wrong. The thing you were running from was yourself, and you brought it right into my life disguised as kindness. Amara, get out of my room. Get out of my life. If I ever see you again, I'm calling the police." A nurse rushed in, alarmed by the monitors. "What's going on? She needs to rest." "They were just leaving," Amara said flatly. She lay back down and turned her face toward the wall. "Both of them." Min-jae walked out first, looking almost sympathetic. Jae-min stood frozen in the doorway, watching Amara's shoulders shake with silent crying. "Sir, you need to leave," the nurse said firmly. Jae-min took one last look at the woman he loved, the woman he'd destroyed, and turned away. He walked through those hospital corridors in a daze, took the elevator down, stepped out into the rainy Seoul night. His phone buzzed. Min-jae had sent one final message. 19 days left. "You just lost 5 billion won, and the only real thing you ever had. Congratulations, Hyung-nim. You played yourself." Jae-min stood in the rain, suit soaking through, and finally understood what Min-jae had tried to warn him about weeks ago. Love didn't make you weak. Love revealed who you'd always been. And Kang Jae-min was, and had always been, a monster. The rain poured down harder, washing nothing clean. Jae-min didn't go home. He stood in the hospital parking lot as rain hammered down, soaking through his suit until the fabric clung to his skin like a second layer of shame. His driver waited by the sedan, umbrella ready, but Jae-min couldn't make his legs move toward the car. Inside that building, 4 floors up, Amara was crying because of him. The woman who believed people could change, who saw goodness in strangers, who'd looked at Kang Jae-min, crime boss, manipulator, monster, and seen someone worth saving. And he'd destroyed her, not with violence, not with threats, with something worse, hope. He'd made her believe she mattered to him, made her fall in love with a carefully constructed lie. And when the truth finally surfaced, it hadn't just broken her heart, it had shattered her ability to trust her own judgment. That was the real damage. Amara would recover from the heartbreak, but she'd never again look at a kind gesture without wondering what calculation hid beneath it. Never again open herself up without that seed of doubt poisoning everything. He'd taken her capacity for trust and murdered it. Jaemin's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from associates. Missed calls from Dong-hyun. The empire demanding his attention. He turned the phone off and walked into the rain. Child. Jaemin wandered Seoul's streets for hours. No destination, no purpose, just movement to avoid the suffocating stillness of thought. He walked through Gangnam, his kingdom of glass towers and luxury corruption. Walked past the nightclubs he owned, the casinos that laundered his money, the corporate headquarters that provided legal cover for illegal operations. Every building was a monument to his power. Every building felt empty. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Han River. Jaemin found himself on the same path where he'd walked with Amara weeks ago, where she'd talked about the river flowing regardless of human chaos, where she'd smiled at the water like it held secrets worth keeping. He sat on a bench and watched the river move. His phone, still off, felt like a bomb in his pocket. Eventually he'd have to turn it back on. Face the consequences of abandoning that negotiation. Deal with Min Jae's smug satisfaction. Return to being Kang Jae-min, the untouchable crime lord. But for a few more hours, he could just be a man who'd lost everything that mattered. A jogger passed by, then another. Morning commuters began filtering toward subway stations. Seoul woke up around him, indifferent to his devastation. Amara was probably awake now. Maybe the nurses had brought breakfast. Maybe Mrs. Kang or one of the other volunteers had visited. Maybe she was trying not to think about the man who'd weaponized her kindness. Or maybe she was thinking about him constantly, unable to stop picking at the wound. Jaemin's chest constricted. He'd been trained since childhood to compartmentalize emotions. Feelings were weaknesses to exploit in others, not indulge in himself. But sitting beside the river as dawn bled across the sky, he couldn't compartmentalize anything. The grief was total. And beneath the grief, something darker. Rage. Not at Amara, not even at Min Jae, though his associate had delivered the killing blow with obvious pleasure. Rage at himself. For being stupid enough to think he could play this game without consequences. For believing he could manipulate someone into loving him and somehow avoid becoming exactly what he'd always been, a predator who destroyed beautiful things. For falling in love and thinking that changed anything. His phone buzzed in his pocket even though it was off. No, not his phone. A different vibration. He reached into his jacket and found his work phone, the encrypted one only his inner circle had access to. 37 missed calls, 53 messages. Jaemin's stomach dropped. He opened the messages. Most were from Dong-hyun, increasingly frantic. "Sir, where are you? The Chinese deal collapsed. They're furious you walked out. Rival gangs are moving on our Busan territory. We need orders. Sir, please respond. People are asking questions." The last message had arrived 10 minutes ago. Min Jae is calling an emergency meeting. Says you've lost control. Sir, you need to get back here now. Jaemin stared at the screen. The empire he'd spent 15 years building was fracturing because he'd walked away from a negotiation to sit beside a hospital bed. Because for 3 hours, he'd chosen Amara over everything else. And it hadn't mattered. She still hated him. The empire still demanded its pound of flesh. He'd lost both. Jaemin stood, bones aching like he'd aged a decade overnight. He turned the other phone back on and called his driver. "Sir!" Choi sounded relieved and terrified. "Where are you?" "Uido Park, send the car." "Right away." "Sir, Min Jae has been—" "I know." Jaemin's voice came out flat, emotionless. The crime boss reasserting control over the broken man. "I'll handle it." The sedan arrived 12 minutes later. Jaemin climbed into the back seat, still wearing his rain-soaked suit, and stared at his reflection in the tinted window. The man looking back was a stranger. Hollow-eyed, pale, defeated. Kang Jaemin had never looked defeated in his life. "Where to, sir?" Choi asked carefully. Jaemin closed his eyes. "Headquarters." The underground office felt like a tomb. Jaemin's inner circle waited in the conference room. 6 men who'd helped him build an empire on violence and corruption. Dong-hyun stood at attention near the door. The others sat around the table, faces carefully neutral.
Min-jae sat at the far end, smiling. Hyung-nim, he said warmly, like they were friends, like he hadn't just destroyed Jae-min's entire world 12 hours ago. We were worried about you. Jae-min took his seat at the head of the table. Report. Dong-hyun stepped forward. The Chinese are threatening to move their shipping contracts to the Busan Syndicate. They consider your absence from yesterday's negotiation a sign of disrespect. He paused. They want a formal apology and a 20% discount on the next 6 months of operations, or they walk. Territorial issues? Jaemin's voice stayed mechanical. 3 of our gambling operations in Busan were hit last night. Rivals testing our defenses. They think we're weak. Are we? The room went silent. Dong-hyun chose his words carefully. They think our leadership is distracted. Min-jae laughed. Distracted is a polite word for it. He leaned back in his chair. Our esteemed leader abandoned a $100 million deal to hold hands with his girlfriend in a hospital, then disappeared for 12 hours while our empire started crumbling. His eyes glittered. That's not distraction. That's weakness. Careful, Jae-min said quietly. Or what? Min-jae's smile widened. You'll kill me? We both know you're not that man anymore. The old Kang Jae-min would have slit my throat for showing Amara that folder. But you just stood there, begged me not to. He looked around the table. He said, please. The most feared man in Seoul said please. The other men shifted uncomfortably. Jaemin's hands curled into fists beneath the table. I said report on territories, not commentary. They're the same thing now, Min-jae shot back. You think the Chinese don't hear rumors? You think our rivals don't know you've been washing dishes at a soup kitchen twice a week? You think they don't see weakness? Enough. It's not enough. It's just getting started. Min-jae stood, planting his hands on the table. You made yourself vulnerable for a woman, and in our world, vulnerability is blood in the water. Sharks are circling, Hyung-nim, and you're too busy crying over spilled sentiment to notice. Jae-min stood slowly. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. You want to know about weakness? Jaemin's voice was lethal. Weakness is showing someone a folder because you're jealous of their happiness. Weakness is sabotaging your own associate because you can't stand seeing him care about something other than money and violence. He walked around the table toward Min-jae. You didn't show Amara that document because she deserved the truth. You did it because you're a miserable bastard who can't tolerate the possibility that someone might actually change. Min-jae didn't back down. I did it because you needed to remember who you are. A crime boss. A predator. Not some lovesick fool playing house with a community volunteer. And who the fuck are you to decide who I am? The man who's known you for 15 years. The man who watched you become great by being ruthless. Min-jae's expression hardened. You think love makes you better? It makes you weak. It makes you hesitate. And in our world, hesitation gets you killed. Jae-min grabbed Min-jae by the throat and slammed him against the wall. The other men jumped up, but didn't interfere. This was between the two of them. You destroyed the one good thing in my life, Jae-min said, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. For what? A point? A lesson? Min-jae smiled, even with Jae-min's hand crushing his windpipe. To save you from yourself. I didn't need saving. Yes, you did. Min-jae's eyes were bright with conviction. Because you were about to throw everything away. Your empire, your reputation, your power. All for a woman who would have left you the second she found out what you really are. He laughed, a choked, painful sound. I did you a favor, Hyung-nim. She found out now instead of later. Better a clean break than a slow poison. Jaemin's grip tightened. He could kill Min-jae right now, snap his neck, dump his body in the Han River. It would be easy. But Amara's voice echoed in his head. Whatever you're running from doesn't define you. Except it did. Violence defined him. Control defined him. The empire built on suffering defined him. And Min-jae was right. Love had made him weak enough to forget that. Jae-min released Min-jae and stepped back. Min-jae coughed, rubbing his throat. There he is, the real Kang Jae-min. He straightened his jacket. Welcome back, Hyung-nim. Jae-min returned to his seat. Get out, all of you.
The men filed out silently. Min Jae went last, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am sorry you got hurt. But this is who we are. Monsters don't get happy endings. Then he left. Jaemin sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by the trappings of his power. Leather chairs, imported wood, technology worth more than most people's homes. All of it meaningless. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it. A photograph loaded slowly. Amara, leaving the hospital. She looked small, exhausted, broken. Mrs. Kang walked beside her, one arm around her shoulders. The older woman's expression was pure protective fury. Below the image, a message. She checked out this morning, went straight to the center. Wouldn't talk about what happened, but everyone knows something destroyed her. Thought you should see what you did. Mrs. Kang.
Jaemin stared at the photograph. Amara's eyes, even in the grainy hospital security footage, looked dead. Not sad, not angry. Empty. He'd done that. His phone buzzed again. This time, Min Jae. 19 days left on the bet. Still want to try for that proposal? I'll give you an extension if you're feeling ambitious. Jaemin threw his phone across the room. It shattered against the wall.
The next 72 hours passed in mechanical precision. Jaemin met with the Chinese and groveled, offered them a 30% discount and personal assurances of future reliability. They accepted with thinly veiled contempt. He authorized a brutal response to the Busan territory incursions. 3 rival gang members ended up in hospital. 1 didn't make it out. He reviewed financial reports, approved bribes, attended a gala fundraiser where he smiled for cameras beside politicians whose campaigns he'd funded with blood money. He did everything a crime boss was supposed to do and felt nothing. Dong-hyun noticed. Sir, you should rest. You haven't slept in days. I'm fine. You're not fine. You look at... I said I'm fine. Dong-hyun backed off but didn't leave. Sir, permission to speak freely? Jaemin waved dismissively. What Min Jae did was cruel, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Dong-hyun's voice was careful. You were compromised. That woman made you vulnerable, and vulnerability in our line of work is dangerous. And is there a point to this? The point is, you're better off now, back to who you were before she complicated things. Dong-hyun hesitated. You're the boss again, not some volunteer playing pretend. Jaemin looked up sharply. You think that's what I was doing, playing pretend? I think you forgot what world you live in. Dong-hyun's expression was sympathetic but firm. Men like us don't get normal lives. We don't get soup kitchens and Sunday walks by the river. We get power and money and control. That's the trade. And if I don't want that trade anymore? Dong-hyun's eyes widened. Sir, what if I'm tired of being a monster? Jaemin's voice cracked. What if I want to be the man I was when I was with her? That man doesn't exist, sir. That was a performance. A role you played for the bet. It wasn't a performance. Jaemin stood abruptly. That was the only real thing I've done in 15 years. Everything else, this office, this empire, this life, that's the performance. Dong-hyun looked genuinely alarmed. Sir, you need sleep. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in my entire adult life. Jaemin grabbed his jacket. I need to fix this. Fix what? She hates you. It's over. Then I'll make her understand. Understand what? That you manipulated her feelings as part of a bet, but developed real emotions halfway through, so now it's all okay? Dong-hyun shook his head. Sir, there's no version of this conversation that ends with her forgiving you. Jaemin stopped at the door. Maybe not, but I have to try. Why? You won't get your $5 billion. You won't get the girl. What's left to win? Jaemin looked back at his head of security, a man who'd helped him orchestrate kidnappings and murders and political coups. My soul, Jaemin said quietly. If I don't try to fix this, I'll spend the rest of my life being exactly what Min Jae thinks I am, a monster who learned nothing. He left before Dong-hyun could argue further. Jaemin went to the community center. It was late afternoon. The building looked the same, cracked concrete, faded paint, the hand-drawn talent show banner flapping in the wind. But everything felt different. He sat in his car across the street, watching volunteers come and go. students laughing, Mrs. Kang carrying boxes of donated books. The ordinary rhythm of a place built on hope instead of fear. Amara emerged at 6:30, right on schedule. Jaemin's breath caught. She looked thinner, older. The light that used to radiate from her had dimmed to something fragile and forced. She smiled at a teenager who said goodbye, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She'd always smiled with her whole face. Now she smiled with just her mouth. He'd broken something fundamental in her. Jaemin got out of the car. Amara saw him immediately. Her entire body went rigid. "Don't," she said, voice sharp. "Don't come near me. I need to talk to you. You need to leave. Now, or I'm calling the police." She pulled out her phone, hand shaking. "Please, 5 minutes." "You don't get 5 minutes. You don't get anything." Amara's voice rose. "You studied me like I was a project. You learned my routines, my values, my vulnerabilities. You became exactly what I needed and made me fall in love with a lie." "It wasn't all a lie." When?" she demanded. "When did it stop being a lie, Jaemin? After the first week? The second? When exactly did you start developing real feelings? And how the hell am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" People were starting to stare. Mrs. Kang appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing when she saw Jaemin. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," Jaemin said desperately. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know, everything I felt, everything we shared, it became real. You became real to me." "I was always real." Amar's eyes blazed. "I was a real person with real feelings who trusted you, and you treated me like a commodity, like something to win. You're right. You're absolutely right." Jaemin took a step closer. She backed away. "But I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me prove that I've changed." "People don't change, Jaemin." Amar's voice broke. "Not really. They just get better at hiding who they've always been." "That's not true. You changed me. Being around you, seeing how you live, how you care about people, it showed me what I could be instead of what I am. What you are is a liar." Amara wiped her eyes roughly. "And worse than that, you're a liar who made me doubt myself. Every kind thing you did, I have to wonder if it was calculated. Every conversation we had, I have to question if you meant any of it. You didn't just break my heart. You broke my ability to trust my own judgment." The words hit like physical blows. Mrs. Kang was walking toward them now, phone in hand. "I'm calling the police," the older woman said firmly. "You need to leave." Jaemin ignored her, focused entirely on Amara. "Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this." "You can't fix this," Amara shouted. "There's no magic words, no grand gesture, no amount of groveling that makes this okay. You need to accept that you destroyed something beautiful and walk away." "I can't." "Why not? You already won. The bet's almost over. You got exactly what you wanted. You made me fall in love with you. Congratulations. Now leave me alone so I can figure out how to trust people again." "I don't care about the bet. I care about you." Amara laughed bitterly. "You care about your guilt. There's a difference." She turned away. "Go back to your shipping logistics life and your expensive suits. Go back to whatever world you actually belong to. Because it's not this one." She walked into the community center without looking back. Mrs. Kang stepped between Jaemin and the door. "She asked you to leave. If I see you here again, I'm filing a restraining order." "I'm not trying to hurt her. You already did." Mrs. Kang's expression was iron. "Whatever you think you feel for her, it doesn't matter. Love isn't a feeling, it's a choice. And you chose to manipulate her. Now live with that choice." She went inside and locked the door. Jaemin stood on the sidewalk as darkness fell over Seoul. Amara was right. Mrs. Kang was right. Dong-hyun and Min-jae were right. There was no fixing this. He'd destroyed the one good thing in his life, and no amount of remorse would resurrect it. Jaemin walked back to his car, climbed into the back seat, and told his driver to go. Didn't matter where. Anywhere but here. 3 days later, Min-jae showed up at Jae-min's penthouse uninvited. Jae-min had been drinking, not his usual controlled single glass of whiskey. Actual drinking, the kind designed to obliterate thought. "You look like shit," Min-jae observed, surveying the empty bottles on the marble counter. "Get out." "Can't. We have business. Min-jae sat down across from him. The bet ends in 2 weeks. We need to settle accounts. I already lost. Take your 5 billion.
See, that's the thing. Min-jae leaned forward. I don't want the money anymore. Jaemin looked up slowly. What? I want something else. Min-jae's expression was unreadable. I want you to go back to being who you were. The ruthless Kang Jaemin who built an empire. The man who made rival gangs piss themselves. Not this pathetic drunk mourning a failed romance. Why do you care?
Because you're my partner.
My friend, despite everything. Min-jae's voice was almost gentle. And watching you destroy yourself over a woman who'll never forgive you is painful. I'm not destroying myself. I'm facing consequences. No, you're wallowing. There's a difference. Min-jae grabbed one of the bottles and poured himself a drink. You made a mistake. You gambled with someone's heart and lost. But you're Kang Jaemin. You don't lose gracefully. You burn everything down and rebuild. I don't want to rebuild. Then what do you want? Jaemin stared at his glass. I want to be someone she could have loved. The real me, not the performance. The real you is a crime boss who orders executions before breakfast. That's not someone she could ever love. Then maybe the real me needs to die. Min-jae went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe Kang Jaemin, the crime boss, needs to disappear. Jaemin met his eyes. Maybe it's time to walk away from all of this. You're drunk. I'm serious. You can't just walk away from an empire. You think our rivals will let you retire peacefully? You think the politicians and prosecutors you've bribed will just forget your existence? Min-jae shook his head. You know too much. You are too dangerous. The only way out of this life is in a body bag. Then maybe that's what I deserve. Min-jae stood abruptly. Stop. You're spiraling. This self-destructive bullshit isn't going to bring her back. I know. Jaemin's voice was hollow. Nothing will bring her back, but maybe I can become someone who wouldn't have hurt her in the first place. By dying? By throwing yourself on a sword for a woman who hates you? Min-jae grabbed Jaemin by the shoulders. Listen to me. You fucked up, monumentally, but you're still breathing, still powerful, still capable of building something from the ashes. I don't want power, I want her. You can't have her. Accept it and move on. How? Jaemin's voice cracked. How do I move on from the only real thing I've ever felt? Min-jae had no answer. They sat in silence as Seoul's neon lights bled through the penthouse windows. Finally, Min-jae spoke. You want my advice? Really? Do I have a choice? Finish what you started, not the bet. Fuck the bet. But the change. Min-jae's expression was serious. You said being around her showed you who you could be. So become that person, not for her, for yourself. Dismantle the parts of your empire that require violence. Transition to legitimate business. Use your wealth to actually help people instead of exploiting them. That's not enough. It's all you've got, Min-jae said bluntly. You can't undo the past, can't make Amara forgive you, but you can choose who you become next. And maybe, years from now, when you've actually changed, you can look at yourself in the mirror without hating what you see. Jaemin wanted to argue, wanted to sink deeper into self-destruction. But somewhere beneath the alcohol and grief, a spark of something else flickered. Not hope. Determination. Min-jae was right. Wallowing changed nothing. If Kang Jaemin wanted to become someone worthy of the love he'd destroyed, he had to actually do the work. Not for Amar's forgiveness, for his own soul. The bet's off, Jaemin said quietly. Keep the 5 billion. I don't want it. Min-jae smiled faintly. Finally. Something that sounds like the old you. This isn't the old me. Jaemin stood, legs unsteady. The old me would have killed you for showing Amar that folder. This version is trying to be better. Better is a process, Hyungnim, not a destination. Then I guess I better start walking. Min-jae left shortly after, and Jaemin stood alone in his penthouse, overlooking the city he'd once ruled with absolute power. Everything looked different now. Not smaller, not less impressive. Just empty. Power without purpose was just noise. And Kang Jaemin was tired of making noise. He pulled out his phone, the new one, since he'd shattered the last, and started making calls. First, his lawyers. Then his accountants.
Then select members of his inner circle. By dawn, he'd initiated the dismantling of his criminal empire. Not dramatically, not publicly, but systematically, carefully, ensuring that the violence he'd built his legacy on would slowly bleed out and die. It would take years, maybe decades. But he had time. Because the one thing Amara had taught him, the lesson that survived even after everything else burned, was simple. You didn't become a better person by wanting to change. You became better by choosing it every single day. Even when no one was watching, even when the person you wanted to be better for would never know. Jaemin looked at the Seoul skyline as dawn broke across the city. Somewhere out there, Amara was waking up, probably still hurt, probably still hating him. And he would spend the rest of his life earning a forgiveness he'd never receive. Not because it would change anything between them, but because it might change everything about. The dismantling began quietly. Jaemin started with the gambling operations, the casinos and underground betting rings that generated the cleanest revenue but required the dirtiest enforcement. He sold them to a legitimate entertainment conglomerate for a fraction of their real value, stipulating that current employees be retained with better wages and benefits. His inner circle thought he'd lost his mind. "You're selling prime assets at a loss," one of his financial advisors protested during a tense meeting 3 weeks after the hospital confrontation. "These operations generate 40% of our quarterly revenue." "I don't care about revenue anymore," Jaemin said flatly. "Find buyers for the rest. Everything that requires violence to maintain, gone." Dong-hyun shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if we divest too quickly, our rivals will see it as weakness. They'll move on our remaining territories." "Let them." The room went silent. "Sir," another associate ventured carefully, "without the criminal operations, we're just a mid-tier tech corporation. You'll lose everything that made you powerful." "Good." Jaemin stood, signaling the meeting was over. Power built on suffering isn't worth keeping. After they left, he sat alone in his office and pulled up the community center's website on his laptop. The talent show was scheduled for next week. A cheerful announcement promised performances by local youth, refreshments, and a silent auction to raise funds for new equipment. Amara's name appeared in the coordinator list. Jaemin stared at her photo, a candid shot of her laughing with students. The picture was probably taken before she met him, before he taught her that kindness could be weaponized. His chest ached. He closed the laptop and made another call. "Mr. Kang," his lawyer answered immediately. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to set up an anonymous charitable foundation. 50 million won initial funding, focus areas, youth education, community development, food security programs. Of course, what name should make it completely untraceable to me? And I want the first donation to go to the Mapo Community Youth Center. 20 million won, unrestricted funding." The lawyer paused. "Sir, unrestricted donations at large will raise questions about the source." "Then make it look like it came from a corporate matching program or a grant. I don't care how you structure it. Just make sure they never know it's from me." "Understood." Jaemin hung up and leaned back in his chair. Amara would never know he was funding the center that gave her life meaning. Would never know he was systematically destroying the empire that had made him a monster. And that was the point. Redemption wasn't about recognition. It was about becoming someone who didn't need it. 4 weeks passed. The empire bled out slowly, methodically. Jaemin transferred ownership of nightclubs, dissolved shell companies, severed ties with corrupt politicians. Every week brought new buyers, new contracts, new ways to convert blood money into something resembling legitimacy. His wealth decreased, his power base fractured. Associates who'd followed him for years started looking for new opportunities. Min-jae stopped by the penthouse one evening, looking concerned for the first time since their confrontation. "You're really doing it," he said, surveying the nearly empty living room. Jaemin had started selling furniture, art, anything that reminded him of the man he used to be. "Burning it all down." "Rebuilding," Jaemin corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Min-jae sat on one of the remaining chairs. "Because from where I'm standing, you're destroying everything you spent 15 years creating. And for what? A woman who won't even speak to you? Not for her, for me. That's what you keep saying, but I've watched you for a month now, Hyung-nim. You're not healing. You're punishing yourself."
Jaemin didn't argue because Min-jae wasn't entirely wrong.
Every asset he sold felt like cutting away infected flesh. Every violent operation he shut down was an admission of guilt. Every legitimate business he transitioned to ethical practices was an apology Amara would never hear. It hurt, but it was supposed to hurt.
You know what the worst part is? Min-jae said quietly. You're becoming exactly what she wanted you to be. Kind, generous, someone who gives a damn about strangers. But she'll never know because you destroyed her ability to trust you. I know. So what's the end game? You become a saint and die alone?
Jaemin looked at his associate, his friend, despite everything. The end game is I stop being the reason people suffer. That's it. No grand reunion, no forgiveness, just less harm in the world because I existed. Min-jae shook his head. You're a better man than I am, Hyung-nim. No, I'm just trying to be. After Min-jae left, Jaemin stood at the window overlooking Seoul. The city glittered beneath him, beautiful, brutal, indifferent. Somewhere out there, Amara was living her life. Teaching students, volunteering at soup kitchens, rebuilding the trust he'd demolished. He hoped she was healing. He hoped she'd forgotten him entirely, because that would mean she was free. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Jaemin was reviewing transition contracts when Dong-hyun burst into his office, face pale. Sir, we have a problem. Jaemin looked up. What kind of problem? The Busan syndicate just kidnapped Mrs. Kang. The world stopped. What? They grabbed her outside the community center an hour ago. 2 armed men, unmarked van, professional operation. Dong-hyun's voice was tight. They're demanding 20 million won ransom and full control of our remaining Seoul territories. Jaemin's blood turned to ice. Why would they target Mrs. Kang? Because they've been watching you. They know about the center, know about your connection to it. Dong-hyun hesitated. They know about Amara. The name hit like a physical blow. Jaemin stood abruptly. Where is she? At the center. Police are there now. The kidnappers sent proof-of-life photos to the center's main email. Amara saw them. Jaemin was already moving. Get the car. Now. Sir, if you go there, I don't care. Get the fucking car. Dong-hyun obeyed. Jaemin's mind raced as the sedan tore through Seoul traffic. This was his fault. The Busan syndicate had seen him divesting assets, withdrawing from territories, and interpreted it as weakness. They were testing him, seeing how far they could push before he pushed back. And they'd chosen to push by targeting the one place he cared about, the one person he'd die to protect, even if she hated him. Just. The community center was surrounded by police cruisers when Jaemin arrived. He pushed past the barricades, ignoring officers who tried to stop him. Found the main room filled with crying students, terrified volunteers, and detectives taking statements. And there, standing in the center of the chaos, was Amara. She looked like she'd aged years in 6 weeks, thinner, exhausted. But her voice was steady as she spoke with a detective, showing him something on her phone. Then she saw Jaemin. Her expression shifted from shock to fury in half a second. Get him out of here, she told the detective. Miss Bennett, I said get him out. Her voice rose. He doesn't belong here. Jaemin ignored the detective and walked straight to her. Are you okay? Don't you dare! Amara's eyes blazed. Don't you dare come here pretending to care. I'm not pretending. What happened? What happened is Mrs. Kang got kidnapped because of you. Her voice shook with rage. The kidnapper's message mentioned your name specifically. Said this was payback for you abandoning Busan territories. Said you cared more about charity projects than business. The words confirmed Jaemin's worst fears. Where are they holding her? I don't know. The police are trying to trace the email. Amara's hands clenched into fists. This is your world, isn't it? The real one you were hiding. Violence and kidnapping and ransom demands. Jaemin's throat tightened. Yes. So who are you really? Her voice dropped to something lethal. Some kind of gangster? Mafia boss? Is that why you had surveillance teams and bodyguards and knew exactly how to manipulate people? He could lie. Should lie. But he was done with lies. Yes, he said quietly. I ran a criminal empire. Gambling, smuggling, political corruption.
Everything you're imagining and worse. Amara took a step back like he'd hit her. You brought that world into mine. You made me a target. I know, and I'm going to fix it. How? By what? Negotiating with kidnappers? Paying ransom? Her laugh was bitter. Mrs. Kang is 68 years old. She has a heart condition. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen to her. Jaemin's voice hardened. I promise you. Your promises are worthless. Then I'll show you instead of telling you. He pulled out his phone and called Dong-hyun. Where's the Busan syndicate operating from? Dong-hyun hesitated. Sir, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, address now. They have a stronghold in Haeundae, warehouse district near the old shipyard. But sir, they'll be heavily armed. This isn't a negotiation situation. I don't plan to negotiate. He hung up and turned to Amara. I'm getting Mrs. Kang back. The police can't move fast enough. By the time they get warrants and tactical teams mobilized, she could be dead. His eyes locked with hers. I can get her out tonight. By doing what? Starting a gang war? If I have to. Amara stared at him, horror and disbelief warring on her face. You're insane. Probably. But Mrs. Kang getting kidnapped is my fault. My enemies. My consequences. His voice softened. She's important to you. That makes her important to me. Stop. Amara's voice cracked. Stop trying to be noble. You're a criminal, a liar. Everything about you is poison. You're right, but even poison can be used to cure sometimes. He started toward the door. I'll bring her back alive. That's not a promise. That's a fact. Jaemin. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Amara's voice was barely a whisper. If you get yourself killed trying to save her, I'll never forgive myself for hating you. Then it's a good thing I don't plan on dying. He left before she could respond. The drive to Busan took 3 hours. Jaemin sat in the back seat of his armored sedan, Dong-hyun driving, 3 of his most trusted enforcers in a second vehicle following close behind. All of them were armed, handguns, tactical knives, 1 automatic rifle in the trunk. Jaemin had spent years avoiding direct violence. He'd ordered it, funded it, profited from it, but he'd rarely gotten his own hands dirty. Tonight would be different. Sir, Dong-hyun said carefully, we should at least scout the location first. Confirm Mrs. Kang is there. Assess their numbers. No time. We go in, get her out, leave. And if they have 20 men inside? Then we go through 20 men. Dong-hyun's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. They arrived at the Haeundae warehouse district just after midnight. The area was industrial decay, abandoned shipyards, rusted containers, the smell of salt and motor oil thick in the air. The target warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. 2 guards stood outside smoking, assault rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Jaemin assessed the situation with cold precision. How many exits? He asked. One of his enforcers, a former Special Forces operative named Choi, studied the building. Main entrance, loading dock on the east side, probably a fire exit and back. We hit all 3 simultaneously, fast and loud. I want Mrs. Kang secured within 90 seconds of entry. Sir, if this goes wrong, it won't. They moved into position. Jaemin took the front entrance with Dong-hyun, his heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear, but from the crystalline clarity that came with committing to violence. He'd built an empire on calculated risk. This was the most calculated risk of his life. Dong-hyun met his eyes. On your count, sir. Jaemin pulled his handgun from its holster. The weight felt familiar, almost comforting. 3, 2, 1, Maum. They moved. The front guards didn't even have time to raise their weapons. Dong-hyun took the first one down with a precise strike to the throat. Jaemin disarmed the second and slammed him against the warehouse wall, gun pressed to his temple. Where is she? Jaemin's voice was ice. The guard's eyes widened with recognition. Kang Jaemin. Where is she? Back office, 2nd floor. But you're dead, man. Boss has 12 guys inside. Jaemin knocked him unconscious and kicked open the warehouse door. The main floor was dimly lit, stacks of shipping containers, makeshift partitions,
the smell of cigarettes and sweat. Shouts erupted immediately. Men poured out from behind containers, guns drawn. Jaemin dove behind cover as bullets tore through the air. His enforcers entered through the side and rear simultaneously, catching the Busan gang in a crossfire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Muzzle flashes, screaming, the metallic clang of bullets hitting steel. Jaemin moved through the carnage with brutal efficiency. He'd spent 15 years avoiding this kind of direct confrontation. But muscle memory from his early days, when he'd fought his way up from street-level enforcer to crime boss, reasserted itself. He dropped 2 men with precise shots, disabled a third with a knee strike that shattered cartilage, moved toward the stairs leading to the second floor. A massive enforcer blocked his path, easily 250 pounds of muscle and rage. They collided. The enforcer's fist connected with Jaemin's ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. He tasted copper, responded with an elbow strike to the throat that made the bigger man stumble. They grappled. Jaemin was smaller, faster. He used momentum and leverage, drove his opponent into a support column with enough force to crack concrete. The enforcer dropped. Jaemin climbed the stairs, ribs screaming with every breath. The second floor was quieter, offices converted into makeshift living quarters. He kicked open doors systematically until he found her. Mrs. Kang sat bound to a chair in what looked like a supervisor's office. Her face was bruised. Blood trickled from a split lip, but her eyes were defiant. "You," she breathed when she saw him, not grateful, accusing. "You brought this to us." "I know." Jaemin holstered his gun and cut her restraints with a tactical knife. "Can you walk?" "I'm 68, not dead." "Then we need to move, now." Gunfire still echoed from below. Mrs. Kang struggled to stand, legs cramping from hours of restraint. Jaemin supported her weight without asking permission. They made it to the stairwell before the Busan boss appeared. Park Sung-ho, mid-40s, scar running from temple to jaw, eyes bright with cocaine and violence. He held a pistol aimed directly at Jaemin's head. "Kong Jae-min." Park's smile was vicious. "Heard you went soft. Started playing charity worker. Guess the rumors were true." Jaemin positioned himself between Park and Mrs. Kang. "This ends now. Let us walk out." "Let you walk out after you killed half my crew?" Park laughed. "You're dead. But first, I'm putting a bullet in the old woman. Let you watch. Payback for abandoning Busan. She's got nothing to do with our business." "She's got everything to do with it. You care about her. That makes her valuable." Park's finger tightened on the trigger. "Say goodbye to Grandma, Jaemin." Time slowed. Jaemin saw the barrel shift toward Mrs. Kang, saw Park's finger complete its squeeze, saw the muzzle flash bloom like a flower made of death. He moved on instinct, threw himself in front of Mrs. Kang as the gun fired. The bullet hit him high on the left shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain white-hot and total consumed his entire arm. He collapsed against the railing, vision blurring, but he was still conscious, still holding his own gun. Jaemin fired 3 times. All 3 rounds found their target. Park Sung-ho dropped, expression frozen in surprise, blood spreading across his chest. Below, the gunfire stopped. Dong-hyun's voice echoed up the stairs. "Sir, we've secured the building." Jaemin tried to stand. His legs wouldn't cooperate. Blood soaked through his shirt, warm and slick. Mrs. Kang knelt beside him, hands shaking as she pressed against the wound. "You idiot! You stupid, stupid man!" "Had to," Jaemin managed through gritted teeth. "Amara would never forgive me if you died." "She's never going to forgive you anyway." "I know." His vision started tunneling, but at least she'll be safe now. Dong-hyun appeared with 2 enforcers. They lifted Jaemin carefully, started carrying him down the stairs. Mrs. Kang followed, limping but alive. Outside, police sirens wailed in the distance. Dong-hyun's team had already called for cleanup. Bribes would be paid, evidence would disappear. Official reports would tell whatever story Jaemin's lawyers crafted. That was how his world worked. But as they loaded him into the sedan, blood pooling on leather seats, Jaemin felt something shift. He'd saved one person, made one thing right. It didn't erase his sins, but it was a start. Jaemin woke in a private hospital room.
Not Seoul Medical Center where Amara had been treated. Somewhere smaller, discreet. The kind of facility that didn't ask questions about gunshot wounds. Donghyun sat in a chair beside the bed, looking exhausted. "You've been out for 18 hours, he said when Jaemin's eyes opened. "Bullet went through clean. No major damage. You'll live." Jaemin tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his shoulder. "Mrs. Kang?"
Released to her family this morning, bruised, shaken, but alive. Donghyun paused. "She left a message for you." "What message?" "She said thank you for being stupid enough to take a bullet for an old woman. Now stay away from the center before you get anyone else hurt." Jaemin closed his eyes. Even gratitude came with conditions in his world. "The Busan Syndicate?" he asked. "Scattered. Park Sung-ho's death created a power vacuum. They'll be fighting internally for months. Won't have resources to move on us." "Good." "Sir?" Donghyun's voice dropped. "You could have died." "For what? A volunteer coordinator you barely knew?" "She mattered to Amara. And Amara wants nothing to do with you." "Doesn't matter." Jaemin looked at the ceiling. "Doing the right thing isn't transactional. You don't get points, don't get forgiveness. You just do it because it's right." Donghyun shook his head. "You really have changed." "Not enough. Not yet." A knock at the door interrupted them. Min-jae entered carrying a folder. His expression was unreadable. "Young Nim, good to see you breathing. What do you want?" Min-jae set the folder on the bedside table. "To officially declare you the winner of our bet." Jaemin stared at him. "What?" "The terms were simple. Make Amara fall in love with you within 3 months. She said the words herself, in that hospital room." Min-jae's smile was strange, almost sad. "You won. 5 billion won is yours." "I don't want it." "I know, which is why I'm donating it to the Mapo Community Youth Center in your name. Mrs. Kang will receive a check for 5 billion won with a letter explaining it's from an anonymous donor who wanted to make amends for endangering their organization." Jaemin's throat tightened. "Min-jae, you were right," Min-jae cut him off. "About all of it. I showed Amara that folder because I was jealous. Because watching you become someone better made me feel like the monster I actually am." He looked away. "You took a bullet for an old woman you barely knew. I've never done anything that selfless in my entire life." "It's not too late. You could change too." "No, I couldn't." Min-jae's voice was flat. "I don't have whatever it is that makes redemption possible. But you do. So I'm giving you the tools to use it." He turned to leave. "Min-jae," Jaemin called out. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just become the man she thought you were." He left. Jaemin stared at the folder containing 5 billion won in transfer documents. Money built on cruelty and wagers. Money that would now fund the center where Amara had taught him what goodness looked like. The irony was almost poetic. 3 days later, Jaemin discharged himself against medical advice. His shoulder was immobilized in a sling. Pain radiated through his chest with every breath, but he couldn't stay in that hospital room another second. He had one more thing to do. The community center looked different in late afternoon light. The talent show had been postponed due to Mrs. Kang's kidnapping, but students still filtered in and out, resuming their routines with the resilience of youth. Jaemin sat in his car across the street, watching. Amara emerged at her usual time. She looked better. Some of the light had returned to her eyes. She laughed at something a student said, and the sound carried across the street like music. She was healing. Moving on, forgetting him, exactly what he'd hoped for. Jaemin pulled out his phone and typed a message he'd been composing for weeks. "I know you never want to hear from me again. I know every word I say is contaminated by lies, but I need you to know. Mrs. Kang is safe because you made me want to be someone who saves people instead of destroying them. The center is about to receive a major donation. Use it however you want, and I'm leaving Seoul permanently. You'll never see me again. Not because I don't love you, but because I do. You deserve a life without my poison in it. I'm sorry for everything. Jaemin." His finger hovered over the send button. Then he deleted the entire message. Because even apologies could be manipulative. Even goodbye could be a way of forcing her to think about him. The kindest thing he could do was disappear completely. Let her build a life where Kang Jae-min was just a bad memory that faded over time. He put the phone away and signaled his driver. "Where to, sir?" Jae-min looked at Amara one last time. She was walking toward the subway, canvas bag over her shoulder, completely unaware she was being watched. Beautiful. Strong. Free. Everything he'd almost destroyed. "Away," Jae-min said quietly. "Just away." The sedan pulled into traffic. Jae-min didn't look back, because looking back meant temptation, meant convincing himself that one more conversation, one more chance, one more attempt at redemption might change things. But redemption wasn't about what he wanted. It was about what she needed, and she needed him gone. So he left. Behind him, Seoul stretched endlessly, the city where he'd built an empire and lost his soul and found it again in the eyes of a woman who taught him that kindness wasn't weakness. Ahead, the highway disappeared into mountains and uncertainty. Jae-min closed his eyes and let the city fade. Somewhere in the distance, Amar's life continued without him, and for the first time in his entire existence, Kang Jae-min was grateful to be forgotten. Because being forgotten meant she was safe, and her safety mattered more than his heart ever could. The car drove on. Seoul vanished in the rearview mirror, and the man who'd once ruled it with cruelty and violence became just another stranger disappearing into. The mountains north of Seoul swallowed Jae-min whole. He'd bought a small house in Gangwon province, nothing like the glass penthouse that had once overlooked his empire. Just weathered wood and paper windows, surrounded by pine trees, and the kind of silence that forced a man to confront himself without distraction. No bodyguards, no driver, no empire demanding his attention, just Kang Jae-min and the weight of everything he'd destroyed. The first month was brutal. His shoulder healed slowly, physical therapy replacing the adrenaline that had sustained him through decades of violence. He woke at dawn not because strategy required it, but because nightmares made sleep impossible. Amara's face haunted every dream, sometimes smiling at him across a pojangmatcha table, sometimes staring at him with devastation in a hospital room. He learned to split firewood one-handed, learned to cook simple meals that tasted like ash, learned that loneliness wasn't the absence of people, but the presence of regret. Donghyun called weekly with updates on the empire's final dissolution. "The tech corporation is fully legitimate now," he reported during one call. "All criminal operations severed. Your remaining wealth is invested in ethical funds and charitable foundations." "Good. Sir, you've lost 90% of your net worth in 6 months. Most men didn't need to lose it." Jae-min watched snow fall outside his window. "Anything else?" The Mapo Community Youth Center received the 5 billion won donation. Mrs. Kang initially refused it, thought it was blood money. But once she confirmed it was untraceable and legal, she accepted. They're expanding their programs, hiring more staff. Jaemin's chest tightened. "And Amara?" Donghyun hesitated. "Sir, you said you didn't want updates about her." "I changed my mind. She's thriving. The center's expansion means she's teaching more students. She was interviewed by a local news station about their community impact. Looked happy." The word landed like a blade between his ribs. Happy. Without him. Exactly what he'd wanted. Exactly what destroyed him. "Thank you for the update," Jae-min said quietly. "Don't call again unless it's an emergency." "Sir." He hung up. Outside, winter deepened across the mountains. Jae-min sat alone in his small house and learned what redemption actually cost. Everything, with no guarantee of peace at the end. Spring arrived slowly in Gangwon province. Snow melted into streams that carved through the mountainside. Jae-min planted a small garden, vegetables he had no idea how to grow, but the physical work kept his hands busy and his mind focused on something other than the woman he'd lost. He volunteered at a local community center, not in Seoul, nowhere Amara might accidentally encounter him. Just a small mountain town where elderly residents needed help with repairs and teenagers needed mentorship. Nobody knew who he'd been. Nobody trembled when he walked into a room. He was just Jae-min, the quiet man who'd moved from the city and kept to himself. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like purgatory. Because every act of kindness, every fence he repaired, every student he tutored was shadowed by the knowledge that he was doing it for an audience of one who would never see it. Amara had changed him, but the change came too late to matter. One evening in late April, Jae-min received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Kang stood on his doorstep, looking older but no less formidable. She carried a small bag and wore an expression that could have melted steel. "How did you find me?" Jae-min asked, genuinely surprised. "Your man Dong-hyun. I convinced him I needed to deliver something in person." She pushed past him into the house without invitation. "We need to talk." Jae-min closed the door. "If this is about the donation, it's not about the money." Mrs. Kang set her bag down and turned to face him. "It's about Amara." His heart stopped. "Is she okay? Physically? Yes? Emotionally?" Mrs. Kang's eyes narrowed. "She's drowning and pretending she's swimming." Jae-min sank into a chair. "I don't understand." "After you left, she threw herself into work, took on double shifts at the center, volunteered every night at the soup kitchen, smiled for the cameras when we got that big donation." Mrs. Kang sat across from him. "But I've known that girl for 4 years. I know when she's running from something. She's running from me. That's healthy. She's running from her feelings for you. That's different." The words hit like bullets. "She hates me," Jae-min said flatly. "She should hate me. I manipulated her, lied to her, brought violence into her world." "Yes, you did all those things." Mrs. Kang's voice was sharp. "You're a bastard who deserves every bit of anger she's thrown at you. But here's the thing about Amara. She doesn't know how to hate halfway. She loved you completely, which means she's hating you completely. And that kind of hatred only comes from love that never died." Jae-min looked away. "It doesn't matter. Even if she still has feelings, I destroyed her ability to trust them. The kindest thing I can do is stay gone. The kindest thing you can do is let her make that choice herself." "I did, by leaving." "No, you made the choice for her." Mrs. Kang leaned forward. "You decided she was better off without you. You decided your guilt was more important than her agency. You're still controlling the narrative, Jae-min, just in a different way." The accusation struck bone deep. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Kang pulled a folder from her bag and set it on the table between them. "I want you to read this. Then I want you to make an actual choice instead of hiding in these mountains feeling sorry for yourself." She stood and moved toward the door. "Mrs. Kang," Jae-min called out, "why are you doing this? I put you in danger. I'm everything you should despise." She paused, hand on the doorframe. "Because you took a bullet for me. Because you could have walked away and saved yourself, but you didn't. And because Amara taught me that people are capable of change if they're willing to do the work." Her eyes softened slightly. "You've done the work, Jae-min. Maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself and start living with what you've become." She left. Jae-min sat alone with the folder for nearly an hour before opening it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, handwritten on the center's letterhead. The first was dated 2 months after he'd left Seoul. "Dear Jae-min, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll send it. But Mrs. Kang suggested writing might help process everything, so here I am. I'm still angry. So angry that some days I can barely breathe through it. You lied to me, used me, turned something beautiful into a transaction. But I also can't stop thinking about the man who washed dishes beside me, who served soup to homeless strangers, who sat in a pojang matcha and listened to my dreams like they mattered. Was any of that real, or was it all just strategy? I don't know. And not knowing is killing me. Amara." Jaemin's hand shook as he read the next letter, and the next. Months of Amara's pain and confusion and reluctant recognition that the man she'd fallen in love with had existed, even if he'd been built on lies. The letters tracked her journey from rage to grief to something more complicated. One from 3 months ago read, "Mrs. Kang told me you saved her life. Took a bullet meant for her. I don't know what to do with that information. The man I thought I knew would have done that. But the man you actually are, the crime boss, the manipulator, why would he risk his life for a volunteer coordinator he barely knew? Unless that man and the man I loved are the same person. I don't want them to be the same person. It would be easier if you were just a monster. Monsters are simple. You can hate them without guilt, but you're not simple. And I think that's what I hate most. The final letter was dated 1 week ago. Jaemin, I've written you 53 letters, never sent a single one. Maybe that makes me a coward, or maybe it makes me smart, protecting myself from someone who's already broken my heart once. But here's what I've realized. I can't move forward while you're still a ghost haunting everything I do. Every act of kindness I witness, I wonder if it's manipulation. Every man who shows interest, I compare to you. Every smile feels like a performance because I learned from the best. You didn't just break my heart. You broke my ability to believe in human goodness. And I need to know, was any of it real? The late-night conversations, the walks by the river, the moment you looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. I need the truth, not the version that makes you look better, not the version that absolves your guilt, just truth. If you ever cared about me at all, give me that. Amar Jaemin set the letters down with trembling hands. She wanted truth, the one thing he'd never given her. Outside, spring rain began to fall across the mountains. Jaemin sat in the gathering darkness and made a decision that terrified him more than any firefight or hostile negotiation ever had. He was going back to Seoul, not to win her back, not to seek forgiveness, to give her the truth she deserved, no matter what it cost him. Check. 3 days later, Jaemin stood outside the Mapo Community Youth Center. It was late afternoon. Students filtered out, laughing and shouting goodbyes. The building looked different, fresh paint, new windows, a professionally designed sign. The 5 billion won donation had transformed the place from barely surviving to genuinely thriving. Some good had come from his sins, not enough to balance the scales. Never enough for that. But something. Amara emerged at 6:30, same as always. She wore a yellow dress, different from the one she'd worn that day in Itaewon, but the color suited her the same way. Her natural hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few curls escaping to frame her face. She looked beautiful, and when she saw him standing across the street, her entire body went rigid. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the distance. Two people who'd destroyed and been destroyed by each other, separated by pavement and pain and too many lies to count. Then Amara crossed the street. She stopped 3 feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Mrs. Kang told you," she said. Not a question. "She gave me your letters." "I didn't ask her to do that." "I know." Silence stretched between them. Seoul's traffic rushed past, indifferent to their drama. "Why are you here?" Amara asked finally. Her voice was steady, controlled. "I thought you left permanently." "I did. But you asked for truth, and I owe you that much." "You don't owe me anything. We're not, She stopped herself. "We're strangers who made a mistake." "We're not strangers." Jaemin's voice was quiet but firm. "We were never strangers, and that's the truth you asked for." Amar's jaw tightened. "Don't do this. Don't show up after 6 months and try to—" "I'm not trying to do anything except answer your question." He took a careful breath. "You asked if any of it was real. The answer is yes and no. And it's complicated in ways that make me hate myself more than you ever could. I don't want your self-hatred. I want clarity." "Then let me give it to you." Jaemin gestured toward the park across the street, the same park where they'd walked months ago. "Please, 30 minutes, then I'll leave and never contact you again." Amara studied him with those sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen through his performance from the very beginning. 30 minutes, she agreed. Then you disappear forever. They sat on a bench overlooking a small pond where children fed ducks stale bread. Jaemin told her everything. Not the sanitized version, not the story that made him look better. The raw, ugly truth about who he'd been and what he'd done. He told her about growing up isolated and cold, about discovering that power filled the emptiness where love should have been, about building an empire on violence because violence made sense in ways that human connection never did. He told her about Min Jae's bet, about the surveillance and the strategy and the calculated approach to making her fall in love with him. And then he told her about the moment it stopped being a game. "It was the pojangmatcha," Jaemin said quietly. "After the second Tuesday at the soup kitchen, you invited me for street food, and I sat there watching you laugh with strangers like their happiness mattered as much as your own." He looked at the pond, unable to meet her eyes. I'd spent my entire adult life believing people were fundamentally selfish, that kindness was just manipulation wearing a prettier mask. But you weren't performing. You genuinely cared about a retired teacher and two college students you barely knew.
So you decided to start caring too? Amar's voice was sharp. How convenient. No, I decided I'd been wrong about everything. Jaemin finally looked at her. The plan was to seduce you, make you fall in love and propose within 3 months, win 5 billion won, and prove to myself that emotions were just leverage waiting to be exploited. His voice cracked. But somewhere between washing dishes and walking beside the river, I fell in love with you, really loved you, and it terrified me because I had no idea how to love someone honestly.
Amara's hands clenched in her lap. When? When exactly did you fall in love with me? The hospital. The first time. Jaemin's throat burned. When you almost sent me away but then said I could stay. You were vulnerable and scared, and you still chose to trust me, and I realized I'd never been trusted like that. Never been seen as someone worth trusting despite my flaws. He wiped his eyes roughly. That's when I knew I loved you. And that's when I knew I'd already destroyed any chance of keeping you. Because of the bet. Because I'd built our entire relationship on lies. Even if my feelings became real, the foundation was rotten. He looked at her directly. You asked if any of it was real. Here's the truth. The first month was performance, cold, calculated manipulation. But the second month, everything after that Pojangmacha night, that was real. My feelings, my vulnerability, my desperation to be someone worthy of you, all real.
How am I supposed to believe that? Amar's voice shook. How do I know this isn't just another performance?
You don't. Jaemin's voice was steady despite the tears on his face. You'll never know for certain. That's the price I pay for lying to you. I destroyed your ability to trust me, and no amount of truth can rebuild that foundation. Amara stood abruptly. Then why are you here? If you know I can't trust you, why tell me any of this? Because you deserve to know that you weren't wrong. Jaemin stayed seated, looking up at her. You asked if you'd been fooled completely, if the man you fell in love with was entirely fiction, and I needed you to know he wasn't fiction. He was the person I became when I was with you, the person I'm still trying to be, even though you'll never see it.
So stop. Amar's voice broke. Stop trying to make this noble. You're not a hero who learned to love. You're a manipulator who got caught and is now trying to rewrite history. You're right. The simple agreement seemed to startle her. I am a manipulator, Jaemin continued. I did get caught, and nothing I say can change what I did to you. He stood slowly. But I'm not here seeking forgiveness or redemption. I'm here because you asked for truth, and the truth is, loving you changed me. It didn't erase my sins, didn't make me a good person, but it showed me what goodness looked like. And I've spent the last 6 months trying to become that, even though you'll never know, even though it doesn't benefit me in any way. Then why do it? Because you taught me that worth isn't transactional. His voice was raw. You helped strangers without expecting gratitude. You poured yourself into students who might never remember your name. You built a life around giving instead of taking, and it never occurred to you to ask what you'd get in return. He smiled sadly. You showed me that becoming a better person isn't about reward. It's about refusing to keep being the monster you've always been. Amara wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I hate you for making this complicated. I know. I hate you for taking a bullet for Mrs. Kang. I know. I hate you for leaving Seoul without saying goodbye. I know. And I hate you most of all for making me fall in love with a version of you that might have been real. Her voice was barely a whisper. Because if it was real, even partially, then I lost something I'll never get back. Jaemin closed his eyes. I'm so sorry, Amara. For all of it. For approaching you as a bet. For making you doubt yourself. For showing you that kindness can be weaponized. He opened his eyes and met her gaze. You asked for truth. The truth is, I love you. I'll love you for the rest of my life. And that love has no purpose except to remind me daily of what I destroyed. The words hung between them like smoke. Children's laughter echoed across the pond. Somewhere in the distance, a street vendor called out his prices. Seoul moved around them, indifferent to their pain. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Her expression cycled through anger, grief,
longing, and something too complicated to name. "I can't forgive you," she said finally. "Not today. Maybe not ever. I'm not asking you to. But I need you to know," her voice broke. "I need you to know that I loved you too. The real you. The man who washed dishes and listened to my dreams and made me feel seen." Tears streamed down her face, and losing him broke something in me that I don't know how to fix. Jaemin's chest cracked open. "I'm so sorry." "Stop apologizing." Amara wiped her face roughly. "Apologies don't fix anything. They just make you feel better." "Then tell me what would fix it, please. I'll do anything." "Nothing fixes it. That's the point." She looked at him with devastating clarity. "You broke my heart. I'm learning to live with the pieces, and maybe someday I'll build something new from the wreckage. But it won't include you." The finality in her voice was absolute. Jaemin nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay. Okay. I'll leave you alone. Forever. Like I promised." He took a step back. "But before I go, can I ask you one thing?" Amara hesitated, then nodded. "Did you mean it? When you said you loved me?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "I loved you completely, which is why I can't trust myself around you, because part of me still loves you despite everything, and that part makes me weak." "That part makes you human," Jaemin said gently. "Love isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes any of this matter." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who got destroyed." "I am, actually." He smiled sadly. "Just in different ways." Amara looked at him one last time, really looked, the way she used to before everything shattered. "Goodbye, Jaemin." "Goodbye, Amara." She turned and walked away. Jaemin watched until she disappeared into the evening crowd. Then he sat back down on the bench and let himself break completely. No performance, no control, no empire demanding he hold himself together. Just a man who'd found love too late and in all the wrong ways, crying beside a pond where children fed ducks and the world kept spinning without noticing his devastation. Boom. 2 years later. Jaemin stood in the community center he'd built in Gangwon province. It was smaller than Amara's center in Seoul, more rustic, but it served the mountain towns with the same dedication: after-school programs, job training, food distribution for elderly residents who struggled through harsh winters. He'd funded it entirely with what remained of his former wealth, ran it himself with a small staff of local volunteers who knew him only as the quiet man who'd moved from the city and wanted to help. No one knew about his past, about the empire he'd destroyed or the woman who'd destroyed him. They just knew he showed up every day, taught classes, fixed broken equipment, listened to teenagers complain about their parents with the patience of someone who understood that small problems mattered to the people living them. It wasn't redemption. Redemption required forgiveness, and Jaemin had learned to live without it. But it was purpose, and purpose was enough. One afternoon in late spring, a visitor arrived. Jaemin was teaching an English class to middle school students when his assistant knocked on the door. "Someone's here to see you," she said quietly. "Says it's important." Jaemin excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Amara stood beside the window, looking out at the mountains. The world stopped. She looked different, older, more settled into herself. Her hair was longer, pulled back in thick braids. She wore simple clothes, no makeup, and the kind of peace that came from hard-won battles with inner demons. "Hi," she said when she noticed him. Jaemin's throat closed. "Hi." They stood in awkward silence for a long moment. "Mrs. Kang told me about this place," Amara said finally. "About what you've been doing. I didn't believe her at first. Thought maybe it was another performance. It's not. I know." She turned to face him fully. "I came to see for myself. Spent the last 2 days in town asking questions, talking to your students and their parents, reading the programs you've built." "Why?" "Because I needed to know if you were real." Her voice was steady but carried weight. If the man who destroyed me actually became the person he claimed he wanted to be. Jaemin's heart hammered. And you did." Amara's eyes were unreadable. "You actually changed, built something meaningful, helped people without expecting anything in return." She paused.
Mrs. Kang was right. You've done the work. That doesn't change what I did to you. No, it doesn't. Amara crossed her arms. But it changes who you are now, and I needed to see that before I could move forward with my own life. Move forward how? She pulled a small box from her bag and held it out to him. Jamin opened it carefully. Inside were all 53 letters she'd written, the ones Mrs. Kang had brought to his mountain house 2 years ago. I'm letting go, Amara said quietly, of the anger, the hurt, the part of me that loved you and the part that hated you. All of it. She met his eyes. You don't get forgiveness, but you don't get my hatred anymore either. You just get to be someone I used to know who taught me hard lessons about trust and human complexity. Jamin's vision blurred. Thank you. Don't thank me. This isn't for you. Her voice was firm but not cruel. It's for me. I can't heal while you're still a wound I keep picking at. I understand. Amara turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you became someone better. The world needs fewer monsters and more people willing to do the work. Amara Shiv.
Don't. She held up a hand. Don't say you still love me. Don't ask if there's a chance. Don't make this harder than it already is. Jamin closed his mouth and nodded. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. At the door, she stopped one final time. Jamin? Yes? The man I fell in love with, the one who washed dishes and listened to my dreams, he was real. You were right about that. Her voice softened. I just wish I'd met him before the monster learned to wear his face. Then she left. Jamin stood alone in the hallway, holding a box of letters he'd read 1,000 times, and felt something shift inside his chest. Not closure. Closure was a myth. But release. Amara had given him the rarest gift, permission to exist in her memory as something other than pure villain or tragic hero. Just a complicated human who'd caused harm and spent years trying to balance the scales. He would never balance them completely, but he would keep trying. Because that's what redemption actually looked like. Not a destination, but a direction. Not forgiveness, but persistence. Not love, but the refusal to let love's absence turn him back into the monster he'd once been. Hai-min returned to his classroom where teenagers waited impatiently for their English lesson to continue. Sorry for the interruption, he said, settling back into his chair. Where were we? A student raised her hand. You were teaching us about the difference between regret and remorse. Jamin smiled faintly. Right. Regret is wishing you hadn't done something. Remorse is committing to never do it again. He looked at the eager faces before him, children who saw him only as a teacher, not a reformed criminal. The difference is in the action that follows the feeling. The class continued. Outside, spring sunshine poured across the mountains. Somewhere in Seoul, Amara was returning to her life, teaching her own students, building her own future, carrying the scars he'd given her, but no longer defined by them. And in a small mountain town where nobody knew his past, Kang Jae-min taught English to teenagers and helped elderly residents fix their homes and learned that becoming a better person didn't erase your sins. It just gave you a reason to wake up and try again. The wager had cost him 5 billion won, an empire, and the only woman he'd ever loved. But it had given him something more valuable than any of it, a soul worth saving. Not because he'd been forgiven, but because he'd finally learned to forgive himself for being human, flawed, broken, capable of terrible harm and tremendous change. The kind of person who would spend the rest of his life proving that monsters could choose to become something else. Not heroes, just people trying to leave the world slightly less dark than they found it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the mountain wind carried the scent of pine and possibility, Jaemin would remember Amara's smile across a pojangmatcha table and feel grateful, not for what he'd had, but for what she'd shown him was possible. The capacity to love honestly, the courage to change completely, the strength to keep going even when forgiveness never came. Seoul glittered in the distance, barely visible beyond the mountain peaks. And Kang Jae-min, former crime boss, failed lover, reluctant teacher, stood at his window and whispered the only prayer that mattered. Thank you for destroying me. It was the only way I could be rebuilt. The mountains offered no response, but they didn't need to, because the answer lived in every student he taught, every community he helped, every day he chose to be better instead of bitter. Love hadn't saved him, but it had shown him how to save himself. And in the end, that was the only redemption that counted.